Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Spells Creation Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Today was the UA High Entrance Exam, the day when several high school students demonstrated their mental and physical abilities in order to become students at the prestigious UA High School. For those who want to enroll in the heroic or general class, the entrance exam consists of a written test and a practical test. The latter is the more important. The reason the practical test is more important is that it allows the UA staff to see how the participants use their quirks and, if they spot one that catches their eye, they may consider prioritizing that student for enrollment in the heroic class. The dream of many children around the world is to become a hero. But in this year, the UA staff saw something unusual, a green-haired kid wielding a strange blue grimoire in one hand while blasting spheres made of energy with the other. That wouldn't normally have caught the attention of the UA teachers, or even the principal, who was overseeing the exam alongside them in the observation room. Quirks in this world came in different forms and flavors, making that display understandable if his quirk worked that way. But what caught their attention was the energy itself. It changed shapes, forms, and even effects based on what the kid said before firing the sphere. After a couple of seconds, Nezu had on a tablet the information and documents that the student presented to UA. His name is Izuku Midoriya. Age, quirk name, Grimorio de Magia Azul. Nezu said. That kind of name surprised him, as the quirk name was quite long and didn't give many clues about what it could do unless the magia part of that name implied that he could do magic tricks in a way with his quirk. Grimorio de Magia Azul? That is quite lengthy for a quirk name. Is that Italian or something? One of the female teachers said. She was the heroine Midnight, and while she was not only an accomplished heroine but also an expert on modern art and capable of teaching it, her grasp of any language that wasn't Japanese was quite shaky at best. I think that it's Spanish. A male teacher said. People moved quite quickly from that conversation as they were seeing how those spheres of energy were turning into fire, ice, thunder, and even real missiles based on what that boy said, from what they were seeing at the moment. Andanada ardient. Vendaval gelido. Descarga de plasma. Missiles autoguiados. The video feed showed that kid shouting those things before performing an attack that made either his free hand or the grimoire release whatever he was calling for. They had seen how that boy had first created a massive fireball, which then split into smaller ones that sought out other robots to destroy. Then they saw him release a gust of cold air that had frozen only the robots that were caught in the blast of said cold air, and then consecutively unleashed a blast of dark purple electricity that completely fried those frozen robots. To them, at last, make some smaller missiles to be fired from his book that had destroyed some of the robots that weren't near him. That display of versatility was what caught their attention, as quirks were quite limited on what they could do, and quirks that were versatile at first glance, like the one of that kid, were quite rare. And quite dangerous. Needless to say, Nezu decided to up the ante and activated the 0-point robot to put pressure on all the participants, now that they had only 10 minutes left in the test. There was one hero in that room who saw all that was happening and, subconsciously, touched the left side of his body. That hero was All Might, and in comparison to a lot of people in that room, he was the only one who knew far more about Izuku's potential than everyone else in this room for personal reasons, and he knew that the 0-point robot wouldn't be too much of a problem for the boy as long as he played his cards right. But the hero was frantically looking at those screens to find someone else after he paid a long gaze to that screen that showed Izuku's performance. The hero's gaze relaxed a little when he saw the pale gray hair of his niece, who was taking part in the entrance exam at UA, and saw that she decided to turn back when the 0-point robot appeared, but not before using her quirk to rescue one kid who had tripped and fallen to the ground while panicking after the robot appeared. All Might didn't want to either play favorites or act like an overbearing parent, but considering that said girl and her family were the closest thing to a family that the number one hero had, and how his own responsibilities as a hero had partially damaged her family until the situation improved somewhat, then All Might couldn't help but worry for the condition of Reina's shield during this exam. That poor girl had suffered a lot because of the dedication of both her parents to him and his duties as a hero, to the point of breaking her family in half and having her and her mother move away from where they lived to stay in Japan when she was only 5 years old, to have her mother take a position in an important organization in Japan so she could give the hero some extra help from within that organization to help him to hide his injured state from the public, and it was only thanks to that green-haired boy that Reina found a childhood friend whose quirk had performed more than one miracle both for her family and All Might himself. Those miracles that Izuku Midoriya did both for Reina's family and the hero himself made All Might fully consider Izuku as a hero in the making, and he even told the boy that he could sponsor him so he could take the recommendation exam instead of the one that he was doing, but Izuku refused that offer, saying that he wanted to make it to UA Hero School like a normal person would do over having someone giving him a boost as he wanted to do things right. All Might was somewhat surprised by Izuku's refusal to accept his endorsement and sponsorship to take the recompensation exam, but he respected the boy's decision to stick to his principles and do things his way. All Might just hoped that Izuku's bouts of reckless behavior when he was a kid were now under control, because the last thing he wanted to do was to tell Reina that her childhood friend had gotten injured and failed to enter the hero course because he hadn't grown up enough from his reckless behavior. But aside from that, All Might had a good feeling about the situation and hoped for things to go well for both kids during this exam. "What the?" Izuku said as he saw the 0-point robot appear in the distance. Buildings around the giant robot began to collapse, and some of the kids near him lost their nerve and ran back to the entrance in panic. It was a valid strategy given the situation. However, Izuku decided to stay around a little while longer to make sure he was truly alone before pulling back. He knew it would be unheroic to simply run away and not check the area in case someone could be left in danger behind, just to save your own skin. "Help!" The sound of a girl asking for help reached Izuku's ears as he was still in the area, and he saw that there was a short brunette who was almost buried alive by debris and barely avoided being crushed to death by sheer luck. "Give me a second," Izuku said and then checked his trusty grimoire. The grimoire was the way that his quirk manifested in this world and had been with him since his quirk appeared in kindergarten. It looked like a thick, old blue book that he could summon at will. Although summoning a book was less impressive than creating explosions with your sweat and other flashy quirks, the grimoire served as a vital tool, allowing him to channel and organize the diverse powers he absorbed. Izuku's quirk required a more open mind to be usable. His quirk worked by obtaining data from other people's quirks through either observation or being affected by their quirks, and once he obtained enough data, he could use his quirk to create something akin to a magic spell based on the information he had accumulated from other quirks. This power made his quirk far more flexible in terms of what it could do, as it wasn't limited to doing only one thing. But it made him something of a pariah in society, as people became upset at the idea of someone taking what made them unique and using it for their own benefit. This quirk cost him his bond with Bakugo when they were kids. Bakugo flipped out and became really upset when Izuku managed to learn how to pull off something similar to his explosions with his quirk, to the point of cutting ties with him and even breaking the friendship between their mothers because of it. But considering how far Bakugo had fallen since their childhood days, Izuku was happy when he got a better childhood friend than Bakugo after their friendship was broken because of jealousy. "This one. Peso Pluma," Izuku said as he focused on the spell he wanted to use, then released a small sphere of energy that expanded into a dark energy dome for a couple of seconds, which made all the debris holding the girl trapped lose almost all its weight and become as light as a feather. Izuku had a habit of naming his spells in Spanish because of practical reasons. He believed that in a world in which English was so widely spread, calling your attacks in another language that wasn't as widely spread as English was a tactical advantage. Of course, Izuku knew that Spanish was also spoken in many places and had something prepared in case he encountered people who spoke it. Izuku took that chance to quickly pull the girl out of that mess, as Izuku's control with his spells was good enough to allow him to decide who was affected by certain spells and who wasn't. Izuku called what he could do with his quirk spells because it was a way to define what he could do in a way that made sense. And because he was a fan of RPG games, and he wasn't going to waste that opportunity to call what he could do in a way that he liked. "Thank you," the girl weakly said. She was still with her heart in her throat as the fear and shock of the situation hadn't abandoned her body yet, even if she was free now. Izuku was about to tell her to leave, but then the 0-point robot arrived at their location, and the girl panicked as she saw it extend one of its hands to grab them. Guardia final. Izuku shouted as he called upon the power of his quirk to create a dome of energy that kept both the girl and himself safe from that robot hand as the dome repelled it the moment it made contact. The heroes saw that happening and were surprised to see that Izuku had something like that hidden in his sleeves, but they weren't prepared for what came next. Ola Korosaiva. Izuku extended his hand in the direction of the 0-point robot and then unleashed a torrent of strange colored water that hit the gigantic robot and made it rust quickly. Seconds after the water made its mark, it rusted so fast and quickly that it started to malfunction on the spot and then fell apart. The sound of the robot falling apart on the spot managed to make the girl relax, and then Izuku looked at her. "We should go back to the entrance now. Can you move on your own?" Izuku asked. He saw how the girl then tried to move on her own after Izuku managed to pull her out, and she almost fell to the ground as she complained of an injured ankle. "That I'm not a doctor here, but I have something I can help. Viento Albo," Izuku said as he cast one of his unique spells that had a peculiar property. Viento Albo was a healing spell that was created with the information of a healing quirk alongside some other emitting quirks. The amount of healing done by it was directly proportional to how healthy he was, mirroring how Final Fantasy's White Wind Blue magic spell worked by healing someone by the same amount of health as the caster had when casting that spell. That meant that said healing was less healing and more, making people who were affected by Viento Albo to be put in a similar physical condition to the one he was at the moment of casting that particular spell, which also included organs, as Izuku learned one day. The girl felt the pain in her injured ankle vanish and thanked Izuku before they both walked to the entrance of the fake city to reach the others, since the exam was now more or less over, and it made no sense to stay there anymore. "It's a shame that Ray wasn't in this area." That was the last comment that was caught on camera before Izuku, and that girl moved away from the reach of the flying drone that recorded the area, and then the heroes there talked about that display of power from Izuku's part. Izuku rode the train back to the station nearest his home. While waiting for his connecting train, he checked his phone to see if Ray was active on the chat app, hoping to pass the time. How unlucky I had been. We had been in the same place today, yet we didn't manage to find even a second to interact before the practical exam started, and then we didn't even end up in the same examination area. It's not fair at all. Izuku saw that Ray had written him a message. Seconds after he logged into the app. "I know that, but it's not like we can't see each other whatever we want, Ray. We both hung up together 2 days before the exam in order to brainstorm ways to do it, and sadly, luck wasn't in our favor today." Izuku wrote. Izuku didn't have to wait that much before Ray wrote a reply. "I get it, but I was so eager to finally fight at your side, like all those times we fantasized about it when we were kids. And I feel somewhat robbed." Izuku chuckled a little before writing a reply. "Come on, I'm sure that we both are going to make it to the hero course, and we will have the chance to do things together. You just have to be patient." Izuku typed. "Yes, I'm going to make sure of that," Ray said before she logged out of the app. Probably because she was going to change trains or something and didn't want to get distracted while she did. Ray lived in Aichi Prefecture after moving out of Mustafu years ago with her mom due to job-related issues, but the friendship between their families was quite strong, and since Izuku had little social interaction in his area, he used that free time to spend with Ray. Izuku may call her Ray, but that was kind of a childhood nickname that he gave to her when they met for the first time. When she introduced herself to him with 2 names instead of 1, Izuku wasn't paying too much attention at the time, so he decided to call her Ray in those moments. Considering that their friendship is still holding strong after all those years and she likes that nickname, Izuku refers to her as Ray almost all the time. However, if they are going to be classmates, or at least attend the same school, then Izuku would have to be more respectful and refer to her by her given name, or her family name, depending on the situation. But he would deal with that situation the moment it came to him. For the time being, he would return home and hope that his efforts in this entrance exam would pay off and allow him to enter the hero course, as he had dedicated a lot of time and effort to train himself in order to be prepared for the entrance exam of UA and didn't want to disappoint those few individuals who had put their faith in him to become a hero, like his parents, Ray's parents and older sister, and All Might. Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts as the train stopped at its destination, and Izuku then decided to get off the train to make the rest of the trip home on foot, putting all those thoughts in the back of his mind as he walked back home after the hard day that he had in UA. A couple of weeks had passed since UA entrance exam, and Izuku was back in Aldera in order to continue his education there until the next school year started, and from Izuku's point of view, if someone asked him how his day was going today, he would say it's too long. It hasn't even been an hour since school started. He didn't like either the staff or the students from Aldera. Both blindly worshipped and praised Bakugo for his potential as a hero while ignoring his petulant, childish behavior. So he wasn't eager to endure whatever the principal had in mind. The principal decided to gather everyone in the gym to announce that Bakugo would probably have been accepted to UA. They wanted to pat themselves on the back and consider their plan to get their golden child into UA a success. That's what it looked like was going to happen. But when the principal started to read UA's mail in public, the content left more than one person speechless. Using a laptop connected to a projector, the principal began to read the mail received from UA. The email started with a general congratulation to the students who took and passed the entrance exam. It also revealed the written exam score. Bakugo bragged about his almost perfect score, but then grew upset when he realized Izuku was just a couple of points behind him. Bakugo's hatred of Izuku dated back to their childhood because his ability to copy quirks made him pull off something similar to one of his explosions, and that made him really mad. Bakugo was the kind of person who threw a tantrum when Izuku matched or surpassed him on a test. Not even scoring just a little less than Bakugo stopped him from being upset at Izuku. But Izuku had already gotten used to that childish and petulant behavior and simply ignored his whining. He had to endure some sabotage of his scores from the faculty, who were so eager to make Bakugo happy that screwing with his academic results was always on the table, so their golden boy didn't get angry. So when the principal began reading the letter, it mentioned the most notable student of Aldera. Izuku heard that UA's letter praised his performance, but didn't even mention Bakugo. Izuku did his best to keep his cool, even though he wanted to start flipping off everyone in that room out of happiness. The fact that UA considered him far more notable than Bakugo, while Aldera had spent years coddling Bakugo, was a huge moment for Izuku. They thought it would only bring them good things if they focused on Bakugo. But now, Izuku felt the kind of schadenfreude that made his days as bright as a warm summer day. 94 points? No way. The first place in the practical exam. Bakugo was barely mentioned at all. Izuku heard not only his classmates, but also some teachers and underclassmen commenting on what was in that letter. As he observed the scene, he noticed Bakugo standing rigidly, his fists clenched at his sides. His knuckles were white, and his jaw was set in a hard line, betraying his struggle to contain his anger. His eyes, usually full of bravado, now seemed to frantically dart around the room as he processed the shocking news. The principal, aware of the potential for an outburst, tried to end the assembly hastily to send everyone back to their classes. Bakugo's usual cocky demeanor was replaced by a cold fury, and for a brief moment, Izuku saw how Bakugo's confidence shattered, like his soul had been ripped apart from his body. The principal had to give an insincere congratulations to Izuku for his success in the entrance exam before everyone was told to return to their classes, and then the rest of the school day continued as normal. But the illusion that Bakugo was that untouchable golden boy who was blessed beyond belief and was destined for greatness had been shattered for good the moment that the UA letter spoke only about Izuku's performance in order to praise it, while Bakugo only was told his score and nothing else. For everyone who had endured Bakugo's childish, petulant behavior for so long, only to see that the best hero school in the world didn't give the boy any special treatment, it was part shocking and part vindicating. Whatever little time both Izuku and Bakugo had in Aldera now was marred by the revelation that the boy whom a lot of people were wary of because of how his quirk worked was praised by the best hero school, while the one whom everyone praised as a hero in the making only because of how flashy his quirk was didn't even make enough of an impression there to be mentioned in the same way that Izuku had been. Katsuki Bakugo was many things. A model student at Aldera, which wasn't impressive considering that Aldera Jr. was a subpar school that encouraged Bakugo's uncivil behavior for years at the cost of the education of other, better kids who didn't have a flashy quirk like him. but were better people in general, as they were civil individuals and not whiny little kids who threw temper tantrums if someone dared to surpass them, like Bakugo truly was at his core. Someone with a flashy quirk, a thing that, while impressive, was not unique to him, as there were people who could do the same things he could with his quirk, without having to struggle with the limitations Bakugo faced with his own. And someone who had a massive bone to pick with Izuku Midoriya the moment Izuku pulled off something similar to his explosions with his own quirk, but even better than what Bakugo could do. Whatever bond they had as kids died because of Bakugo's emotions and feelings, which drove them to even push their mothers to stop being friends. Bakugo's fragile ego as a kid refused to accept that someone could have a quirk that could render his own unnecessary, and that was what made him fully burn the bridges between their families. That kind of reaction was the result of a little kid being overly praised by others for something he was born with, which he internalized as part of his own identity. In a world where quirks were also a part of a person's whole identity, those with the power to copy others were looked at by almost everyone with scorn, as people didn't like it when someone could copy their quirk, which was a part of themselves, and render them not as special as they believed they were. That kind of mindset may have colored Izuku's childhood a little, but he had a support structure with his parents, and then Reina and her family, which helped him not feel that broken up about the whole thing. After all, going from not having friends among normal kids to being on speaking terms with a Nobel Prize winner and even All Might himself because they were related to Reina made Izuku consider that he had moved up in the world in a way. But now, Bakugo was following Izuku as sneakily as possible, as he wanted to have a chat with Izuku in order to demand that he desist from his plans to enter UA, so he wouldn't ruin his origin story by not only coming from the same school but also surpassing him in the entrance exam. Bakugo saw nothing wrong with that, as no one in Aldera even bothered to do their job and curb his uncivil behavior, as they were too busy placating his ego and sabotaging others to make Bakugo stand out from the rest. He believed he could throw his weight around to intimidate Izuku, as he had done with other people in Aldera who annoyed him, even if Izuku simply ignored him and refused to interact with him all the time. He had followed Izuku to Takoba Municipal Beach Park alone, as his two usual lackeys had given him some empty excuses to simply go home instead of following him to see how he tried to put Izuku in his place, but Bakugo cared little about those sycophants. Bakugo, despite his petulant behavior, was smart enough to understand that those two were only his lapdogs and yes-men because it suited their interests and offered them a higher place in the school's social hierarchy. Yet, deep down, Bakugo felt a twinge of frustration and betrayal as he realized their absence reflected his tenuous hold on respect. However, the true sting lay in the UA letter about their performance in the entrance exam and how little of an impression he made at UA compared to Izuku, which had completely shattered the image that the faculty of Aldera had crafted of him. His inability to live up to that hype made people realize he wasn't that impressive after all, nor was he worthy of all the praise and allowances for his unheroic behavior. This realization gnawed at him, stirring a mix of anger and humiliation for being cast from the pedestal he once stood upon. Bakugo never gave a DMN about his surroundings, so while he was walking through the clean beach, he never knew that this place had been filled with trash to the brim for a long time until someone took it upon themselves to tidy this place up so people could enjoy it again. He was too focused on Izuku as he walked to the gazebo on the pier at that beach, so he missed that the beach was now filled with people curious to see how beautiful it was now that the trash was gone. He kept some distance as he saw how Izuku reached two people who were in the gazebo, and then tried to take a position that would keep him both hidden and able to see what Izuku was doing there. "What the?" Bakugo said as he saw Izuku talking with a tall, well-built blonde man in a yellow suit in the gazebo, then looked at the gray-haired girl who covered one eye with a bang, standing alongside the blonde man. "That FND Beach," Bakugo said. He recognized that girl. She was the girl who came out of nowhere when he was 5 years old, and was the only person during his childhood years who never saw him as a hero in the making, but called him out as a villain in the making because he acted like a petty school bully. That girl moved away from Mustafu when Bakugo was around 10 years old, but the mere fact that there was someone in Mustafu who had called him out stuck in his mind like a hot iron. Sadly for Bakugo here, his clear disregard for anyone who wasn't himself and his constant use of demeaning nicknames to refer to others made him unable to remember her name, but only how he called her before she disappeared from his life, and he called her creepy girl because of her hobbies and choice of vocabulary. Young Midoriya, your combined efforts to clean this place to prepare yourselves for the entrance exam had paid off, the blonde man said, and Bakugo snapped out of his own thoughts as he tried to pay attention to that conversation. It's not like he gave F about it, but if there was a way to find something that could get Izuku in trouble, then he was going to take advantage of it. Bakugo heard snippets of that conversation as the sound of the waves and the wind was making his attempt to spy on that conversation more complicated, but he was able to hear that Izuku and that creepy beach, the new demeaning name that Bakugo would use for that girl, had spent the previous year training their bodies and their quirks from time to time by cleaning this place up. That made Bakugo happy, as that meant that he could try to use that fact to get Izuku in trouble, as using your quirk in public, even if it was alone and away from people, could get someone in trouble. Never mind the fact that Bakugo had violated the law about public quirk usage multiple times in the past, as no one wanted to discourage him from his ambition to become a hero, even if he had used his quirk to try to intimidate others. Bakugo waited for both the blonde man and the creepy beach to walk away from the gazebo, then tried to reach Izuku to intimidate him. "Shitty Deku," Bakugo said. One of his hands extended and released small sparks as he was using his quirk to try to pull the usual intimidatory move that he used in Aldera to get those extras to fall in line, but sadly for Bakugo, he was dealing with someone who gave no fs about him. "Well, then I guess that now that I'm alone, you grew a pair of balls and decided to confront me. Typical bully behavior is to wait for victims to be alone. So what the f do you want, Bakugo? I don't want anything to do with your pathetic existence. Whatever you want to say, do it now and get out of my sight," Izuku said. He knew Bakugo had followed him, as Izuku had trained his awareness of his surroundings in order to become a hero. Bakugo was anything but stealthy. Following from a distance may have been a basic way to hide your presence, but Bakugo was unable to fully conceal himself. The fact that Bakugo kept setting off small explosions in his hands while following him spoiled any attempt at stealth on his part. "You have a lot of FING nerve, you worthless Deku, to surpass me in the entrance exam on you. So you are going to not enter UA and forget about becoming a hero, or I'm going to ruin your life," Bakugo said, trying to maliciously smirk in order to show that he meant business, but Izuku simply looked at him like he was walking garbage and then decided to reply to him. "And how are you going to do that, you whiny little beach?" Izuku's words were filled with hatred and hostility for Bakugo, but considering the situation, Izuku could allow himself to talk in the only language that a scumbag like Bakugo could understand. Izuku had always done his best to be above it in the past, as he had to endure the faculty breathing down his neck, making his education harder if Bakugo threw a hissy fit, since the faculty wanted to keep their golden child happy. But considering what had happened today, Bakugo's golden child status would be revoked, and Izuku would finally be able to tell that failure of a person how much he hated his guts. Bakugo didn't take Izuku's reply kindly, and then revealed that he had spied on that conversation that he had with All Might, who was in his civilian mode by not activating his quirk and simply changing his hairstyle, and Ray, and that he would bring that to the police in Mustafu and the faculty in Aldera to get him in trouble. "I want to see you try that. Let's see how well it goes for you, Bakugo." Izuku broke into a laugh before replying to Bakugo's threat and then walked away, leaving a confused and more enraged Bakugo behind. Izuku was done with Bakugo and his bullshit, and being able to not filter himself for the first time in a long time felt nice. Izuku wasn't afraid of Bakugo ratting him out about that, because what would have happened is that Izuku would have had to call All Might to have him say that yes, Izuku did use his quirk to clean that beach, but did so under his permission. And considering how Bakugo worships All Might because of his power, Izuku knew that Bakugo would explode with sheer jealousy if he discovered that he had been training with All Might to clean that beach alongside Ray the past year to prepare for the entrance exam, and Izuku wanted to see Bakugo seething in rage after hearing that. There was no love between those two boys who were once childhood friends, but only Bakugo was the most active in further deteriorating their broken bond. Izuku felt from anger to cold indifference to Bakugo's existence, and while he wouldn't wish for him to die if it happened, then Izuku wouldn't lose any sleep because of it. That is how much their bond had shattered, not only because societal biases gave Bakugo free rein to indulge his worst traits, but also because they refused to do the right thing and try to steer him in the right direction. What happened next wasn't on Izuku, that is what Izuku was sure about. A couple of days had passed after the incident on the beach. A detective and a couple of police officers came to his house to question him about some accusations that a certain blonde piece of sheet had claimed he had illegally used his quirk to clean the Takoba Municipal Beach Park. Izuku wasn't even mad about the whole thing, but it was rich that the police came to his house to question him for using his quirk as a civic duty, while the same police in Mustafu hadn't even bothered to reprimand Bakugo for his illegal use of his quirk as a kid when he tried to intimidate other kids with his explosions. My name is Naomasa Tsukachi. I'm a detective who works with the police. I was called because of my quirk, which could be used to discern the truth or the falsehoods of your statements, as you are going to be questioned in order to find out if you illegally or not used your quirk multiple times in the past to clean Takoba Municipal Beach Park. The detective said. Izuku looked at the man for a couple of seconds before being as truthful as possible in order to see if that man's quirk was as good as the man said it was. I had been using my quirk for the past year after school in order to clean Takoba Municipal Beach Park, but I only used my quirk when I was given permission to do it by a hero who had decided to oversee my training after school. Said hero is a busy man, so I have used my quirk only a few times, relying more on my own physical strength to clean all that trash whenever I went there, and doing all of that in order to prepare myself for the entrance exam of UA. A thing that had paid off as I managed to get the biggest score in the practical part of the exam and made my way to the hero course. Izuku said, looking with certain disdain at the officers who were in his house, as he recognized them as two of the usual ones who were too busy downplaying Bakugo's savage behavior and had little respect for people who believed that Bakugo deserved to be a hero while he acted like a villain freak. That boy is saying the truth. The detective's words shocked the officers, as they were coming to terms with the fact that the boy whom many treated like a nobody and, in a way, a leech because of what he could do with his quirk, had reached the place many kids his age dreamed of reaching. Izuku enjoyed seeing how those two officers had to walk away from his home with their hands empty, as Bakugo's accusations had been countered with one truthful statement from him. All Might told him that he would oversee his training there from time to time to allow him to use his quirk, but that he would benefit the most from improving his physical form by cleaning the beach with his own hands to have something that he could rely on in case his quirk wasn't usable in a particular situation. Ray came by from time to time to help clean the beach, and she also made her part by lifting trash to build some muscle mass, which benefited her quirk. The stronger she was, the stronger her quirk was, from what he could remember. Ray lived away from him now after she moved out of Mustafu because of her mom's work, so her coming to help was only on weekends to not screw with her own timetable. The detective then spoke with him briefly to confirm that what he had said was true, then wished them a good day before walking away. Izuku then remembered, a little too late, that the detective's full name was something he thought he knew. All Might had told him that he had a friend in the police who was a detective with that name as well, and considering that said man was far nicer than the other officers and didn't try to lie about what Izuku had told him when he told him the truth, then maybe said detective was All Might's friend in the force. So that this is Bakugo's doing. Inko Midoriya said. She was told by Izuku about their confrontation on the beach and how Bakugo had threatened him to get him to drop his dream to become a hero, or he would ruin his life, and she knew that Izuku had dared Bakugo to go and do what he had threatened him that he would do if he refused to comply with his request. Yeah. Bakugo waited for All Might and Ray to walk away before trying to corner me in that gazebo to drop that threat, because, for as much as Bakugo says that he is a hero in the making, Bakugo is one who acts like a school bully when it suits him. Izuku said, moving on from what had transpired, as Izuku knew that it would amount to nothing, as Izuku had told the truth and nothing but the truth, and he didn't had to bust the ultimate trump card on that situation, that was to call All Might himself, who had reached him when he walked away from the beach as he was worried about what Bakugo wanted from him, and the hero told him to call him if needed to clear any misunderstanding. Izuku could rub this failure on Bakugo's face, but he knew that the best way to get at Bakugo was to treat the whole affair like the nothing burger that it was and not give Bakugo any kind of reaction that would make that weakling happy. Izuku was going to simply move on from this incident, act as if nothing had happened, and mind his own business. He wasn't going to pull a Bakugo and tell that idiot's face that his killing blow to ruin his life had failed, like how his hopes and dreams to become a hero would fail. Izuku knew that the uncertainty of the situation and how Izuku acted like he wasn't bothered at all by what had transpired would make Bakugo even madder, that if he told him to his face that he had failed, and Izuku was all for not doing anything at all, and get Bakugo riled up by having him upset at the fact that he wasn't crumbling like he was expecting as he would do, but Izuku wasn't Bakugo, and he had nothing to fear. Izuku didn't have a documented history of illegal quirk use that hadn't backfired on him, just because people were too high on copium to praise him like he was All Might's second coming, to not stick that knife in his shoulder and destroy his dreams of becoming a hero. Izuku wasn't going to pay Bakugo with the same coin by then shattering his dreams to become a hero, even if he should do that anyway to prevent UA from wasting their time with him, as Izuku believed that Bakugo wouldn't need any help to destroy his own dreams on his own by letting him be himself in a place that wouldn't tolerate his bullshit. And since UA was the best hero school in the world, that then Bakugo's bullshit wouldn't be tolerated at all unless everyone there started to suffer the same delusion of thinking that Bakugo was a hero in the making, despite his unheroic behavior that everyone in Aldera had been suffering until now. Come on, mate. I wish to talk about that proposal of yours, Nezu said. There were still a couple of days before the new school year started, and Nezu wanted to talk about All Might's peculiar request. All Might had decided, in light of his situation, to become a teacher at UA, as he felt his time as an active hero was coming to an end and did not want to simply retire and do nothing after all his years of active duty. Yes, about that request of mine. You wish to have Izuku Midoriya in the same class as your niece, and while I don't have really a problem with that request, considering the situation, I want to talk with you about Midoriya a little before making a final decision. Nezu said. He had read Izuku's files and reports from Aldera and they weren't painting a good picture of that boy if he wanted to be honest. Nezu was a little more open-minded about the situation, considering the fact that the boy came from Aldera, and said school had quite the reputation of doctoring the files of students that they liked or disliked in order to either embellish them or paint them in the worst way possible. More than once, a kid from Aldera who was considered a model student became a nasty hooligan the moment they ended up in another school where some of the kids whose files painted them as villains in the making were the nicest people to be around. Nezu was almost 100% sure that whatever was written about Izuku was applicable to the other boy that came from Aldera instead of him, as Bakugo's savage behavior during the practical part of the entrance exam didn't paint that boy as a model student as those papers tried to paint him. But Nezu still wanted to get some info about that boy that All Might had took some interest in by the looks of it. I'm not surprised. Both Midoriya and my niece talked about how subpar Aldera is as a school, and while she managed to get away from it because she moved out of Mustafu to a city in Aichi, Midoriya was not so fortunate and had to stay there until today. More than once, Midoriya had told me about how the faculty tries to sabotage those who weren't in the faculty's good graces through doctoring the results of their tests or even trying to force them to detention after school if they had upset the students that the faculty liked. All Might started to talk about what Izuku had shared with him about Aldera and their methods during those times that All Might was there to oversee Izuku's training on the beach. I see. Nezu simply said, disappointed to hear how a place that was meant to educate and shape those younger minds into functional adults was filled to the brim with discriminatory BS that wasted all those kids' futures for the benefit of an elite few that ended up crashing down the moment that they didn't receive that special treatment that the faculty gave to them in order to make them think that they were above the others. The conversation between All Might and Nezu fully dispelled the doubts that Nezu had about Izuku while casting a dark shadow on Bakugo's future in UA as All Might brought to him what Izuku told him about what Bakugo tried to do to him when All Might and her niece weren't in the area, and All Might had been told by Naomasa about how Bakugo ended up accusing Izuku of illegal quirk usage and got 2 police officers, and himself sent to Izuku's house in order to get him in trouble. Nezu decided to make a quick change to the class rosters, which had been almost finished, and pulled Izuku out of Class 1A, switching him with Nido Manoma to get him into Class 1B and ensure that neither Izuku nor Bakugo was in the same class. Because, for as much as Bakugo was starting to look like someone unfit for the hero course, he had managed to make his way to the hero course both with his academic results and his performance during the practical part. A performance that had been heavily penalized, as Bakugo's clear disregard for others had subtracted a lot of points from him, and the only reason that he wasn't kicked out was that Bakugo didn't harm anyone despite his clear lack of care for those around him. But this new information may change things up a little and may force Nezu to bring some discipline to that boy if Bakugo showed that he was hooligan in the making and not a hero hopeful. People like Bakugo weren't uncommon in this day and age, and while Nezu was willing to give that boy a chance to prove himself, Nezu knew now that Bakugo deserved no pampering and needed to be disciplined if he wanted to become a hero, because people with a behavior like Bakugo shouldn't be allowed to even think that they had a chance to become heroes when the world was filled with people with quirks that could do similar things to the one that he had and were far better persons than Bakugo was. If Bakugo refused to shape up and grow as a person, then UA wouldn't be his school for much longer. The big day had come, and despite the fact that Izuku was able to see for the last few days of his tenure in Aldera how Bakugo's status as Golden Child was revoked by the faculty, and people told Bakugo to his face how pathetic he was and how even the teachers punished him now when he tried to attack others, Izuku needed to move on from that chapter of his life and focus on what was important, like getting ready to go to UA after he had his things prepared and was almost ready to go after a few disastrous attempts to put on a tie. Do you carry everything in your backpack, Izuku? Yes, Mom. Do you have my number memorized in case something happens? Yes, Mom. Do you? Mom, please, is this really necessary? I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm just a little worried. Yes, I know, but I'm going to UA, not to a war zone. Besides, Mr. Yagi is there, and Ray would be there as well. Sure, for all I know, Bakugo would be there as well, but I'm sure that he won't get away with acting like his petulant self in UA. I know, but it's that when I get to the entrance of UA, I'll give you a call, okay? Okay, but if something happens, you just have to. I'd better get going or I'll be late. See you in the afternoon, Mom. Okay, dear, see you later. Izuku saw his mom wave goodbye to him as he reached the door after their heartwarming exchange. Izuku knew that his mom worrying about him wasn't because she thought that he was going to have a bad time or something, but because she cared about his well-being, and she knew that Izuku had always had to face an uphill battle when interacting with others because of the knee-jerk reaction that people had when they heard about his quirk. That prejudice that he had to deal with had made him almost a pariah in Aldera, and he was almost sad to see how he only received the closest thing to respect there after Aldera's golden boy had failed to impress UA while he managed to do that with ease. But that is sadly how things work in this day and age, as society worships quirks to that extent. And those who had the power to copy others were, in a way, shunned because people considered their quirks part of themselves and saw copying powers as a violation of what made them unique. Izuku, at least, was lucky enough to find his own support network, which, while smaller, was filled with people of grand standing. Like All Might, a thing that surprised him as he never expected that becoming friends with the only girl in Mustafu at that point that didn't have a nasty reaction to his quirk would allow him to know the #1 hero himself, and David Shield, who was Ray's dad, and he was the one that promised him that he would make gear for free for him if he made it to the hero course. Izuku sat on the train that would take him to the nearest station to UA and was trying his best not to lose his nerve here. He may have managed to not lose his cool in the past as the idea of entering UA was still far away to get himself excited, but now that the day had come, Izuku was having some trouble containing his excitement. Izuku activated his quirk and summoned his trusty grimoire in order to read it for a while to distract himself before the train reached its destination, and then he would be forced to walk to UA. Today was the day on which all the efforts that he had made in the past years would be rewarded. All the blood, sweat, and tears that had been poured in order to become as strong and skilled as he was now would be his starting point here. He had hopes of this being the beginning of a good time in school now that he had left Aldera behind, and he was putting his faith in UA's faculty of not treating Bakugo like he was God's greatest gift on earth, but he would have to see that for himself in order to put that small fear out of his mind. But this wasn't about Bakugo, this was now about him and his story of how he would become a hero. Okay. This is what I had been waiting for so long, Izuku said as he was near the entrance to UA after walking out of that train station, witnessing the building that would be his new school for 3 years, and now having a small case of stage fright as he was so close to UA after all the efforts that he had made to reach this moment in his life. He came here 30 minutes before classes started, as he wanted to enjoy the sight of the school in silence for some time as he psyched himself up to take that first step into that prestigious institution, because, for all the confidence he had in himself, not even he was immune to feeling like a little kid in a candy store when he was so close to the place that he had dreamed of attending when he was a kid. Izuku was snapped from his musings as he felt a hidden presence in the area. That presence wasn't hostile to him at all, but it made him focus on his surroundings, and then he took a quick glance at his surroundings before he calmed down and decided to enter UA as he believed that maybe it was another person like him who had come earlier to UA and had seen him there. He picked up the letter sent to his house about his class and reread it as he made his way to Class 1B. To Izuku Midoriya. Your performance in both the written test and the practical part of the entrance exam is quite praiseworthy. You scored 94 points out of 100 on the written test. And your total heroic points in the practical parts are also. You may have scored a few rescue points during the practical part in comparison to the villain points, but you did show that you were the first one to go and help others when they were in need of help. And your impressive performance when you rescued that participant and then dealt with the 0-point robot gave you a bonus score of 30 rescue points that allowed you to take the first place in the entrance exam. Your impressive performance in both physical and intellectual endeavors earned you a place in the hero course at this institution. Your class in UA would be 1B, and I hope that you could grow to become a great hero. Nezu. That was a more or less resumed version of that letter, without the details like asking who his support gear provider was and then providing extra details about his support gear, but he focused on the important part of that letter for him. Izuku walked to what would be his classroom after he was given some directions and his student ID card at the entrance, and then saw that he wasn't the only person who had come to UA as early as he did. He entered the classroom, which was open for some reason, and saw that 8 people were already inside. Izuku wasn't able to find Ray there, so maybe she hadn't come to UA yet. Ray had told him about how she managed to get a spot in the same class as him, and that she would come to UA with Mr. Yagi, at least for her first day. He simply moved to what was supposed to be his assigned seat, the one numbered 18, sitting in silence for a while as he looked out the window to pass the time. Izuku saw some of his future classmates look at him with confusion as he simply sat in his seat and minded his own business, not being a social person, but that was the result of years in Aldera, making Izuku somewhat wary of socializing with others. Izuku knew that he wasn't being fair with his new classmates, as Izuku wanted to believe that UA wasn't the kind of place that would allow things to devolve in the same way that it did in Aldera, but old habits died hard, and Izuku just defaulted on his usual stance of keeping his distance from people until he was sure that he could be cool with them. He just hoped for the best and spent his time in silence as he summoned his grimoire to read it for a while before classes started. Vlad King was walking to the classroom where his new students were located, and he was now thinking about what Nezu told him about the particular bunch of students that he would be in charge of this year. From the 2 students who came to his classroom from the recommendation exam to the student that Nezu told had some involvement with All Might. Vlad King was surprised to see that this year was one of those in which he had a particularly powerful lineup of students in his classroom. Vlad King wasn't that concerned about those things, as he cared about fulfilling his duty as a teacher and hero to his students, but it was clear to him that in the past years, the split of students for the hero course was quite biased, giving him not-so-powerful students, while Eraserhead always got students with powerful, flashy quirks. Vlad King had his own issues with Eraserhead as a teacher, as it was clear to the hero that Eraserhead's methods of teaching, or the lack of them to be more precise, were only possible in UA, as Nezu believed in non-standard methods of teaching and gave the teachers in UA free rein to do what they believed was best. Vlad King took quite a few issues with Eraserhead's methods, such as expelling those kids on the first day of class, only to readmit them later, with that temporary expulsion remaining on their permanent records. Combined with Eraserhead refusing to do his job and forcing his students to do all the work themselves, this irked Vlad King, but there was little he could do as Nezu saw that Eraserhead's malicious methods still gave results. Even if those who had the misfortune of being under his care had little good to say about UA when people questioned them about UA's teaching methods. His disdain for his coworker aside, Vlad King was now taking a quick glance at those who would be under his care, at least for the first year, as soon as he entered the classroom. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sekijiro Ken, my hero name is Vlad King, and I would be your homeroom teacher," the hero said as soon as he reached his desk, and then he saw how those who were still socializing quickly moved to their desk and sat in their assigned spots. "Since this is the first day of class, today is going to be a little light, so let's start with something simple. I will call your number, and the person who answers will say their name, their quirk, and a little something about themselves. After that, we will go to the auditorium for orientation day and a short speech prepared by Principal Nezu," said Vlad King, who then saw how everyone was expectant, to which number he would call up first. Number 18. Izuku heard Vlad King call his number, and he braced himself for the inevitable. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. My quirk is called Grimorio de Magia Azul. I like to see people use their quirks for studying purposes, and I enjoy analyzing quirks in my spare time, not at a professional level, but as a way to pass the time," Izuku said. He noticed his classmates' reactions and saw a short brunette in his class looking at him with surprising intensity, even though her eyes were covered by her bangs. It took Izuku a few seconds to realize she was the girl he had helped during the entrance exam. "Good, this is a good start. Now, number 19, it's your turn," Vlad King said. He then saw the girl seated at a desk to Izuku's right stand up to introduce herself. "I have many names, but you may refer to me as Reiko Yanagi. My quirk is called Poltergeist. I like scary things, to the point of keeping track of all kinds of urban legends and even owning old copies of the first scary movies ever made." Reiko Yanagi began, her cold tone and strange posture, elbows to her sides, hands dangling along with her pale skin, and a small mole below her bottom lip, left of center, gave her a cold, eerie yet beautiful allure. She was about to continue her lengthy introduction, but Izuku stepped in. "Rere, please. Save some details for later. You can't just tell your whole life story at the first meeting. You have to get people interested first and hook them before dropping all the lore," Izuku joked, stopping Reiko's tirade. The class watched as her cold, emotionless face suddenly showed a hint of shyness. Her cheeks turned slightly red, and she sounded more emotional. "You're right, Izuku. I can't give up the ghost that early," Reiko said, giggling a little before sitting back in her chair, considering her introduction over. Reiko Yanagi, or Reina Shield as she was born, was the girl who had become Izuku's childhood friend after his bond with Bakugo felt threatened because of Bakugo's own actions. She came to Japan with her mother after her parents separated to help All Might, and Izuku was the only kid in those moments when she was living in Mustafu who got closer to her. Reiko didn't make herself any favor by calling out Bakugo's behavior when they were kids, as that made almost everyone in Mustafu to treat her like she was a social pariah. That only made her focus even more in her bond with Izuku, and even if she ended moving out of Mustafu when she was 10, their bond was so strong that it endured the long distance between them. The fact that Izuku had managed to solve many of the problems that had ravaged her family also made her more emotionally invested in their bond. Izuku never judged her for her strange fascination with scary things, even when she was a kid, and even endured her scary movie marathon when they were kids to the point that she was quite emotionally attached to the boy. She didn't care that much about being a hero, but since Izuku wasn't to be one, then she made the effort to become one just to have an excuse to be with him in the same class, to the point of asking All Might, or her Uncle Might, as her older sister and herself called the number one hero, for a favor to try to get them in the same class. She was happy to see that she was one number behind Izuku in this class, which meant that she was sitting next to him, and wanted to enjoy her chance to be classmates with Izuku again in a more positive school environment, as Aldera hadn't been a good place to be when they were kids. She watched as her new classmates, aside from Izuku, gave their brief introductions before walking to the UA auditorium to listen to Nezu's brief opening speech for the day, before the school year officially started, and she was already enjoying herself. While Izuku and Reiko were having a somewhat good time in their new classroom, Bakugo wasn't having a good experience at all. First, he wasn't impressed with either his new classmates or his new homeroom teacher. The fact that Nezu himself called him to his house to tell him that his behavior had put him in a precarious position at UA, and that he had at most 3 warnings before being expelled, put quite a damper on his mood after he set foot in UA. Bakugo was still upset that Izuku ended up at UA, as his plan to get him in trouble backfired to the point that the police came to his home to tell him not to waste their time with false accusations anymore. He had spent his last days as a student in Aldera watching as all the prestige and status he possessed just by existing were quickly revoked, and he was forced to deal with the consequences of his actions for the first time in a long while. That frustration and anger flared up the moment he heard from his new classmates that he wasn't as impressive as he believed, with some of them commenting that his personality made him unfit to be a hero. Bakugo wasted one of his 3 warnings when he tried to attack the boy with glasses who made the most hurtful comment to his pride, forcing his homeroom teacher to step in and use his quirk and restraining weapon to subdue him. That teacher was Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, for those who preferred to use his hero name. He was notorious for his expulsion scares and his uncaring use of them to make his students feel the threat of death in the field, forcing them to take things seriously. This approach stemmed from the trauma of seeing his best friend die in the field when they were both hero students. While his intention to make his students more serious was almost noble, his methods left much to be desired. For as much as Eraserhead wanted his students to take things seriously, he also refused to provide the guidance and support he was meant to as their homeroom teacher, preferring to nap during work hours so he could rest from his duties as an underground hero. Eraserhead's students were almost forced to learn to rely on themselves, and his callous methods left them embittered toward UA after their tenure as hero students was over. The expulsions Eraserhead issued became a permanent stain on their records, making their future careers as heroes more complicated. Eraserhead harbored quite a few biases despite his claim of not reading his students' files before meeting them, in an effort to avoid such bias. He was now looking at his students with the intention of expelling one to make room for his personal student, Shinso Hitoshi, to enter the hero course after Shinso had failed to impress during the exam, arguing that the practical part was biased against people like Shinso. And while he saw that Bakugo had potential and DSPLN in using his quirk, as Bakugo scored first in almost all trials of the quirk assessment test, Eraserhead did not appreciate that Bakugo was still too much of a petulant child. Bakugo was on the verge of leaving himself with only one more warning after he tried to attack a brunette classmate with his explosions, simply because she managed to obtain a result that completely surpassed his in a single exercise during the test. But Eraserhead had a soft spot for misfits in society, and he misinterpreted Bakugo's behavior in the worst possible way, to the point of thinking that Bakugo had endured severe discrimination or something similar because of his hyper-competitive, aggressive behavior. If the hero had read the files Nezu told him to read, he wouldn't have hesitated to expel Bakugo on the spot the moment he tried to attack a classmate. He would have known that Bakugo's behavior was deeply rooted, the result of being overly coddled by adults and never having been forced to accept his failures. That misplaced empathy for Bakugo led Eraserhead to make an unwise decision. He expelled Nito Manoma from Class 1A to open a spot for his apprentice, while trying to give another chance to Katsuki Bakugo, even if the boy never deserved one. But actions have consequences, and for the first time in his career, Eraserhead's decision not to read his students' files would bring heavy downsides for himself and those around him in the near future. The second day of class in UA came after a first day that was filled with a long lecture and speech from Nezu and a little extra exposure for Izuku, as his performance during the exam was shown to the other first-year students, and Izuku was itching to finally get his first real class in the hero course. Izuku got his wish in a way, as he and the others were told to go to the PE grounds so they could take part in the quirk apprehension test during their first hour of class before their heroic foundation class, and Izuku and the others were now in the locker rooms that were located in the building in that area in order to change clothes. They were going to change into their gym uniforms, and Izuku was now exiting the room to go outside and join his classmates. Vlad King then explained what the quirk apprehension test was and told them they would perform physical tests while using their quirks to gauge their basic capabilities. Midoriya, since you scored first in the practical exam, you will perform one of those tests first in order to give your classmates a visual example of what they need to do. Vlad King said as he threw a small ball at him that Izuku caught with one hand and then was told to stand in a small circle and throw that ball as far as he could without getting out of that circle, and that he could use his quirk to make that throw. I see. Izuku said as he summoned his grimoire and then thought about what he could do to make this throw while using his quirk. Peso Pluma. Izuku said as he activated the spell, and the ball was engulfed by a dark sphere for a couple of seconds, further reducing its gravity. Izuku then threw the ball with his strong arm, and then seconds after performing that throw, he was ready to fire another spell. Impulso Sonico. Izuku then released another sphere of energy from the tip of his fingers that impacted with the still flying sphere and then made it fly even farther away, to the point that it flew outside UA grounds. Impressive. Vlad King said as he looked at the device meant to track that small ball, and saw that Izuku had thrown it quite far away. Sure, it wasn't like that girl from Class 1A who chucked that thing into space, but it was quite impressive anyway, and Izuku had shown that he knew how to use his quirk. Now then, I will call you in class order, and you will perform all those tests in that order. Don't hold back and give it your best effort. Vlad King said as he told Izuku to return to the group, then started calling his students in order so they could perform the tests to see their physical aptitudes when they were allowed to use their quirks. He saw how his students then gave it their all, even though some of them didn't have quirks that could benefit them during those tests. After they were done, he told them their results. Do not get discouraged if your results are quite low here. This is just your starting line here. You can now only go up from here and have 2 more years to grow stronger and more imaginative with your quirks, so you could perform better in those kinds of tests if you want to do them again. Vlad King said as he saw some of his students quite upset about their low performance. Vlad King was an eraserhead, and he wasn't going to try to demoralize his students if they didn't reach the highest scores in this test, as this was the first time for almost everyone in this class that they had been told to use their quirks for something like that, and he also understood that some of the quirks of his students weren't really meant to be used in those physical tests. He did his best to frame the whole thing as just their starting line and how they could only go up from here, before dismissing them for the day, after telling them to change back into their uniforms and get ready for their first heroic class. Vlad King would join that class as it was not only All Might's first class, but was also a joint class between the first-year classes, and he wanted to give some help to his new coworker, as he wasn't sure if All Might would be able to manage to deal with 40 kids at the same time. He just hoped that All Might's first class wouldn't end up in a chaotic mess. Your hero costume is quite theatrical for a guy who wants to be a hero, Midoriya, said one of Izuku's new classmates, Tetsu. The boys watched Izuku change into his hero costume for their upcoming heroic foundation class and were surprised by his choice of attire. Izuku's hero costume had the flair of a stage magician, drawing curious glances from his classmates. Yet, compared to the eccentric designs that other heroes chose for their costumes, his outfit didn't seem so unusual. He wore sleek white moccasins with a modern edge, an unconventional choice for the world of heroism. Heroes were often forced to perform strenuous physical activities. These shoes, though, held a hidden advantage. They were not only stylish but were also built for action, balancing form and function perfectly. His pants and vest were both a rich blue with small white and black details. He paired them with a clean white shirt, giving him an elegant look. Despite their refined appearance, every piece was crafted from durable materials and offered ample protection. He wore a knee-length raincoat over his vest, blue outside and lined in white. The coat added both dramatic flair and practical coverage. Completing the look, Izuku wore a blue domino mask fitted with special glasses to shield his eyes from sand or smoke. Atop his head sat a blue tricorn adorned with a white feather. Every detail blended style with the necessities of hero work. What can I say? I do love old RPGs, and I always wanted to wear something similar to those heroes in those games. Izuku said as he picked up his last 2 pieces of gear. A walking cane that looked more like a short staff that hid some secret functionalities that Izuku hoped to use sparingly, and a blue fork with small frogs engraved on it. The fork was more like a joke item that he asked Reiko's dad and older sister to make, if possible, as it was a silly reference to one of the strangest blue mages in the story of Final Fantasy, but they did it anyway. At least that fork was big enough for him to use an emergency weapon if needed, but that was why he had the walking cane anyway. He walked away to the meeting room, in which he saw how Mr. Yagi, who was All Might, and Reiko were talking about her first class on UA had gone while Vlad King was checking on something on the screens on that room before All Might saw that Izuku and the other boys from Class 1B were entering the room, and then put their small conversation on hold. All Might never formed his own family, considering his duties and responsibilities as a hero, so the Shield family became his own family in a way, to the point of being the uncle for both girls of the family. He had quite a close relationship with Reiko Yanagi, or Reina Shield as he knew her before she ended up in Japan because of All Might's own issues, and he was acting like a concerned parent who was also a teacher in the same school where his child was studying. All Might quickly switched gears and then waited for the girls of Class 1B to appear before talking to them about what would happen in this first heroic foundation class, which was meant to be a joint class between the students of Class 1A and 1B, but the students of Class 1A were running late by the looks of it. The hero looked at Vlad King as he wasn't sure what to do before Vlad King told him to explain to his students what they would do today in this class, and that he would give the students of Class 1A a shorter version of that explanation in his place to get them up to speed, so as not to waste much time. Today we will have a battle trial exercise. All Might said in his usual booming voice in order to mask his nervousness in this situation with his usual heroic persona. All Might was a novice as a teacher and needed to find his footing before being able to perform solo, but he was putting in far more effort considering his situation than the effort that Eraserhead put in his own job as a teacher from Vlad King's perspective. Vlad King saw how All Might tried his best to rein in the enthusiasm of his students, as the idea of being taught by All Might himself got a lot of them fired up, and the hero managed to finish his explanation after some well-timed assistance from Izuku, who either helped the hero by strengthening his arguments about the reason why they would fight inside buildings for this exercise or chimed in with some comments that gave the hero a chance to derail the conversation when some of Izuku's classmates went on a tangent. The atmosphere in the meeting room was quite lively and cheerful as All Might finished his explanation before the students of Class 1A entered, but then it suddenly turned sour as the sound of small explosions coming from that group caught the attention of both All Might and Izuku. "Shitty Deku," Katsuki Bakugo said, seething in anger as he saw that Izuku was still there. Bakugo still believed that his words had any power over Izuku, even if his attempt to get him in trouble failed, and Bakugo wrongly believed that Izuku's decision not to try to get on Bakugo's face for what he did was a sign of capitulation from Izuku's part, instead of Izuku simply not bothering with him, as Izuku wasn't going to go as low as Bakugo had gone to try to get him in trouble. "Young Bakugo, stand down," All Might said. He didn't like Bakugo at all, considering that all that he knew about the boy came from what he had seen that day on the beach alongside Izuku's tales about the boy's unheroic behavior, and while he was willing to give him one chance if he proved that he was willing to behave, the fact that the first thing that Bakugo had done after seeing Izuku in that room was to try to reach his position with his hands in a position that showed that he was trying to use his quirk inside that room made All Might's decision to stand up and try to defuse that situation easier. Bakugo was forced to stop, as he knew that he was on thin ice in UA because of what Nezu said, and if he didn't behave now, then he would kiss his dreams of becoming a hero goodbye. "Well, that I will give you kids a quick explanation about what you will do here today while my students are paired up," Vlad King said. He had seen that interaction, and it didn't take too much for the hero to see that Bakugo had been someone who had managed to slip past UA standards for their students, as it was clear from the behavior that Bakugo had shown that he wasn't hero material at all. Vlad King was surprised to see that Eraserhead hadn't expelled that kid on the spot, as he looked like the kind of kid that Eraserhead would not only expel as part of his expulsion scare, but also be one of the few that would be actively kicked out of UA. Vlad King saw how Bakugo's hateful glare was directed to both Izuku and Reiko as he continued his explanation about the battle trials, and asked himself why Eraserhead had decided to leave a kid like this to stay in the hero course when he was showing a behavior that was unheroic at all. There was a tense atmosphere both inside and outside the building in which the villain team for this battle trial was located. The villain team, which was composed of 4 students of Class 1A, one of them being Bakugo, had to endure Bakugo's forceful way to try to take control of the situation, as he insulted and belittled them, even if they were meant to be a team, and they saw how nasty Bakugo could get if someone got on his nerves. Shinso Hitoshi, Eraserhead's apprentice, who had been inserted into the class after Eraserhead unfairly expelled Nito Manoma, was the reason Nezu finally acted against Eraserhead's false expulsion scares and forced the hero to have a chat with him about his decision this time. As this time, Eraserhead had only expelled one student instead of the whole class as he usually did, but said expulsion was used to benefit someone who had failed to make his way to the hero course through the proper channels. Shinso had gotten his face blasted by one of Bakugo's explosions when he tried to use his quirk to brainwash Bakugo into being a team player. Bakugo, despite his aggressive behavior, was still clever and was able to put 2 and 2 together when he saw how Shinso had used his quirk in the past hour to get Mineta to shut up, so he decided to answer Shinso's words with an explosion to the face rather than risk being brainwashed. The other 2 members of his team, the boy with glasses who almost got his face blasted the first day of class for telling Bakugo his behavior was unheroic, and the girl who had committed the crime of reaching a score in one test during the quirk assessment test that Bakugo was unable to surpass, weren't sure what they should do in this situation. They had seen that Eraserhead had only called Bakugo out once during the first hour of the first day, but had then tolerated his constant outbursts of anger and constant threats to others during the quirk assessment test. They decided to just do what Bakugo wanted and stayed behind to protect the fake warhead while Bakugo went to confront the hero team to kill them, as he said he would. Then, All Might called the whole villain team to tell them to stand down, as what Bakugo had done to Shinso wasn't acceptable, and that they would send Medibots to retrieve the injured Shinso. Sadly for All Might, Bakugo was so consumed by the idea of harming Izuku now that he had been given a free pass to use his quirk against him, that he either willingly ignored the order to stand down, or was too enraged to listen. He then moved outside the room with the intention of attacking the hero team and killing that shitty Deku, as he shouted with all his might while blasting his way out of the building. The hero team, which was composed of Izuku, Reiko, the short brunette whom Izuku saved, and Tetsu, not only heard All Might's orders not to enter the building, but also heard Bakugo's colorful death threats as he made his intention clear to kill that shitty Deku and that creepy Beach who were on the hero team. We are not going to be able to get away from Bakugo now that he is that enraged, Izuku said. He summoned his grimoire and then started to quickly turn pages until he found the spell that he wanted to use. What should we do, Midoriya? The girl asked. She saw that Izuku looked at the grimoire, then at them, before telling them that he had a plan, and that said plan would rely on them. What should we do, Izuku? Reiko asked. She was getting somewhat tense, as the hatred and rage in Bakugo's voice was quite palpable. She wondered how someone could become that deranged for no real reason, since Bakugo had always been in a strong position in the social hierarchy in the past, but now acted as if Izuku had murdered his whole family, when in reality the only thing Izuku had done was climb to a higher position than the one Bakugo held. Look, here is the plan. Izuku Midoriya prepared himself mentally as he stood somewhat away from the entrance of that building, his grimoire in hand and his mind ready to cast whatever spell he needed to put an end to Bakugo's rampage. Here comes, Izuku said as he channeled his quirk, then took a defensive stance, a sphere of energy already at the tips of his hands, mentally counting the seconds before Bakugo flew out of that building and tried to rush him, possessed by a fury that was anything but healthy. I'm going to kill you. Shitty did you. Bakugo screamed at the top of his lungs as he flew out of that building and then used his explosions to not only propel himself in the air to increase his mobility, but also to try to break through Izuku's defenses. Guardia Final. Izuku cast that spell at the right moment and created a dome of energy that blocked Bakugo's explosions that were thrown in his direction. That dome forced Izuku to stay inside of it, and Bakugo took that chance of having Izuku immobilized in order to try to break through his Guardia Final. Die, 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 die already, you shitty do. Bakugo screamed in anger as he threw as many explosions as he could manage in order to break Izuku's Guardia Final, but as the name said, Izuku's dome was quite the ultimate form of defense and tanked all those explosions like they were nothing. I'm going to break that F barrier and beat you to death, you worthless shitty Deku, and then I will find that creepy Beach and beat her up as well. Bakugo shouted in anger, making his intention to harm Izuku and Reiko quite clear, and then he prepared to use his new support tool. Die. You shitty Deku? Bakugo tried to say as he pulled the pin of one of his gauntlets to use the sweat accumulated inside of them to release a more powerful explosion, but then he felt how he started to choke out of nowhere. Bakugo then fell to the ground as the sudden lack of oxygen made him go lightheaded, and then he passed out as he had pushed his body quite hard with that previous attempt of his to destroy Izuku's protective dome. Izuku waited a couple of seconds before he dispelled that dome and then called his classmates after he was sure that Bakugo was out of commission. Reiko and the other two then made their way out of a nearby building and checked on Bakugo. "Reiko, Komori. Your convincing quirks have allowed us to subdue Bakugo," Izuku said. His plan consisted of drawing Bakugo's attention as much as he could in order to allow both Kinoko Komori, the girl that he helped during the entrance exam, and Reiko Yanagi, to use their quirks to slip one spore, created by Komori's quirk, past Bakugo's throat. That spore grew inside his throat and caused Bakugo to pass out due to the sudden lack of air, alongside how hard he had pushed himself a couple of seconds ago. Tetsu was there to act as a last line of defense in case Bakugo tried to switch targets, but thankfully, things went as planned. "What is going to happen to him?" Tetsu said, still coming to terms with how things had quickly spiraled out of control. "I don't know, but you can't blame me for wanting this bastard to rot in jail for the rest of his life," Izuku said. He spared one quick glance at the unconscious Bakugo before All Might and the Medibots came to the scene. "Midoriya," All Might said. He looked quite apologetic at both Izuku and Reiko, as he could have tried to impose his authority to change up that particular pairing, but his decision to give one chance to Bakugo had ended up like this. "It's okay, All Might. This and whatever happens next is on him." That was the last thing Izuku said about Bakugo before moving on with his life. The Medibots then moved to pick up the injured Shinso and the unconscious Bakugo to take them to the UA infirmary, but only one of those kids would walk out of that infirmary as a UA student. Eraserhead sat in Nezu's office. Class had ended over an hour ago, but the incidents in All Might's first foundation class had escalated Nezu's earlier conversation with Eraserhead about his recent actions, stretching it to the present moment. "You know, Eraserhead, your expulsion scare has been something that damaged UA's reputation for a long time. I let it happen anyway and never took away your privilege to expel students and re-enroll them because, in a way, you get results with your methods. But this has been the first year of your career in which you made significant changes to your methods, which I consider improper. Expelling Nito Manoma, who had earned his place in the hero course, just to get your personal apprentice in class, who had failed miserably on the entrance exam, is not only an abuse of power but a misuse of that privilege. You also clearly ignored the massive red flag that Bakugo was and let him off the hook, even though he is exactly the kind of person you hate most. That decision has backfired quite a bit. So, do you have anything to say about this?" Nezu said. He now sat calmly, sipping his tea, and looked at Eraserhead with an intense stare. What happened with Nito Manoma, and then seeing how Bakugo threw away his dreams of being a hero in the most villainous way possible, while Eraserhead tried to defend his decision not to expel Bakugo on the spot under the mistaken idea that Bakugo was a victim of social discrimination and that justified his hyper-aggressive and competitive behavior, had made the mammal's patience with Eraserhead and his antics run dry. Eraserhead was unable to answer that question as he was still coming to terms with what had happened and how his refusal to read Bakugo's file, which had been something that Nezu ordered him to do alongside paying more attention to his behavior, had backfired on him in the worst way possible. Eraserhead had wrongly believed that Bakugo's aggressive and competitive behavior, to the point of trying to get in any of his classmates' faces and almost attack them before Eraserhead told him to stand down, was because Bakugo had quite an inferiority complex and was voicing his frustrations about his perceived failures in the wrong way, but that was far from the truth. Eraserhead had been forced to read that file now, one that had corrections made by Nezu as he investigated his past to parse through the passages written by the faculty of Aldera, and it was clear that Bakugo was someone who had always been coddled by adults. Those same adults had chosen methods to keep Bakugo happy that ruined the boy's ability to accept that he wasn't the very best. Every time someone in Aldera who shared a class with Bakugo committed the sin of surpassing him, Bakugo threw a huge temper tantrum. The faculty, instead of disciplining Bakugo for his childish and petulant behavior, sabotaged others to keep Bakugo believing he was the best. That made Bakugo oversell himself and his skills. He did deserve some credit, as he was skilled with his quirk and physically fit enough to be a hero student. However, Bakugo could not accept anyone surpassing him and tried to attack those who could shatter his image of himself as the best. The sad thing for Eraserhead was that despite Bakugo's childish behavior, he had shown he could pay attention to his surroundings, as he had been the only one who had located him on the first day of class when he was hiding in his sleeping bag, and was able to quickly figure out what Shinso's quirk was and what it could do by seeing him use it on Mineta. That meant that buried under all that childish and wrathful behavior, there was someone with some potential. But Eraserhead had seen that potential wasted way before Bakugo set foot in UA, given what he had done today. Now that he had been forced to see Bakugo for who he truly was, whatever sympathy that had made the hero spare him from being expelled when he needed to find a student to kick out to allow his apprentice to enter the hero course had evaporated. The fact that Bakugo had attacked his personal apprentice with that level of violence, for no reason, may have helped take away the compassion Eraserhead had given to Bakugo. So this is how things are going to be now, Eraserhead, Nezu said. He had been deliberating about the situation after he had been informed about what transpired in that class, and now that he had talked with Eraserhead and had gotten from him why he had shown that much kindness to Bakugo, then Nezu made up his mind about what kind of consequences Eraserhead would have to deal with. From this point forward, Shinso Hitoshi is expelled from the hero course, and while he would be kicked back into the general course instead of kicked out of UA on the spot, a mercy that you refused to give to Manoma, this expulsion would be on his record. Nezu said. The mammal saw how Eraserhead was about to protest about his decision, but Nezu wasn't going to give him any chance to talk here. You will not get any say on this, Eraserhead. The decisions that you had taken in the past day had put UA in this situation, and now that I attack any classmate of yours during the quirk assertion test when one of them performed better than you, and it was only Eraserhead taking pity on you because of his own incompetence as a teacher that had allowed you not to be expelled on your first day in UA. Nezu's words shocked Bakugo, as he wasn't able to understand how someone who had told him to stand down when he tried to put those extras in place for trying to outperform him had in fact been someone that supported him in a way. Bakugo was way too used to teachers always having his back, so anyone who wasn't actively benefiting him was considered against him from his point of view. That kind of petulant, self-centered mindset also led to some teachers in Aldera being fired for not actively feeding Bakugo's ego. But what you had tried to do today is not only unacceptable, but also something that will get you expelled from UA boy. So let's skip any pleasantries and talk about what you are going to face now. Nezu said. Bakugo's face now showed sheer confusion and horror as the words Nezu had told him seconds ago finally reached the boy, bringing little joy to Nezu, even if he enjoyed seeing people squirm like this from time to time, as the situation was tragic in a way. Your parents had been called and had been informed about what is going to happen to you now, and while your mother tried to plead and beg for leniency for you, I'm afraid you aren't deserving of that leniency right now. Nezu said, letting Bakugo hear his words so the boy could process that information. You will not only be expelled from UA, but UA is going to take you to court in order to get you into a juvenile training school for troubled youth and villains in the making that would be located in Mustafu. Nezu said. He may have told Bakugo that there was no deserving of leniency right now, but Mitsuki Bakugo's pleas didn't fall on deaf ears. You can't do that to me. I'm going to surpass All Might no matter what. Bakugo shouted now, his scream of anger after hearing that sounded more like him whining about the situation, rather than him being angry. UA has the right to take their students to court if their actions are unbecoming of a student for this establishment, and while UA had never taken things this far in the past, as none of our most troublesome students had taken things as far as you had done, your situation and your past actions leave me no choice but to do this. Nezu said. Bakugo's face went slack-jawed as Nezu then told him that, as a preventive measure before a trial could be scheduled to give him a proper judgment, he would be forbidden from leaving Shizuoka Prefecture, as he would be forced to wear a tracking device, that was also a quirk suppressor device, that would keep his location known all the time, but that he would be under house arrest with no bail as he was considered dangerous enough because of what his quirk could do. One of the privileges of hero schools was that they could quickly make deals with the Japanese justice system when necessary. That privilege was a remnant of a long-forgotten era in which the world was filled with strife and chaos when quirks manifested, but it was still a thing that all hero schools had access to, and now Bakugo would have faced the consequences of his actions alongside a trial that would permanently alter his fate far sooner than he wanted to. I recommend you, young Bakugo, to think long and hard on the situation that you got yourself into and to do some self-reflection before the trial starts, as the behavior that you show in that trial could be the difference between being sent to a juvenile training school of Class 2, the kind of place that you could end up considering your situation, or to be shipped straight to a juvenile prison. And let me tell you that only one of those places would try to help you to get your life back on track. Nezu finished his speech about Bakugo's most immediate future and then waited for the two heroes to come and take the cuffs off him. Bakugo was then escorted to a police car that would not only take him home but also put a device on his ankle that would track his position and restrict the use of his quirk. Bakugo didn't leave UA with a bang despite the anger that he felt at the unfairness of the situation, but with a silent whimper as the reality of the situation was now starting to seep into his mind, and said reality was now starting to crush his soul. Izuku, how did your first real day of school go? Inko asked. She knew that classes started the previous day, but considering what Izuku told her about what they did that day, she considered this day as Izuku's first day in class at UA. Izuku had returned home after his school hours at UA were over, and since the students of the hero course had 1 extra hour of class, Izuku returned home a little later than she was accustomed to seeing her son return home after school. It was fine that I met new people, I made new friends. Bakugo committed career suicide, the usual stuff for a first day in a new school, Izuku said. That last comment caught Inko by surprise, and she asked Izuku to explain what he meant. Well, we both ended up on opposing teams during our heroic foundation class, which ended up being a joint class with my class and Bakugo's class competing against each other, and Bakugo flipped out in his usual way and caused such a spectacle that he had to be taken to the infirmary at UA after my team and I were forced to incapacitate him to stop him from going on a rampage. Izuku started. He told his mom more details about what happened during that class, like how Bakugo actually incapacitated one of his own classmates before the exercise started and rushed out of the building while screaming that he was going to kill him, and how Izuku relied on his quirk to distract Bakugo long enough for his classmates to use their quirks to put Bakugo out of commission before All Might and the Metabots came to the scene. Mitsuki, how did you raise that boy for things to end like this? Inko said, thinking about the woman who was her friend before Bakugo threw a massive temper tantrum because of what Izuku did with his quirk, and Mitsuki gave her an ultimatum if they wanted to continue being friends. Inko refused to suppress Izuku's creativity with his quirk, forced him to discard the spells that he had created at that point, and forbade him from taking notes of other people's quirks so Bakugo would be happy at the idea of Izuku not being allowed to copy what he could do with his quirk, and that decision to put her son's well-being over Bakugo was what ended their long-time friendship in a way. Inko never regretted that choice, as the mere fact that Mitsuki came to her, upset about what Izuku had done, was to create a spell after seeing multiple people's quirks that could create an explosion like Bakugo could was something that Inko refused to let slide, because who was Mitsuki to force her son to restrain his own quirk when Bakugo had been allowed to use his with no restraint at all? That wasn't the only incident on that day, as then there was a situation during lunch hour after an alarm went off while we were eating, and then the press broke through the barriers that keep them out of school, and we almost suffered some injuries. I had to use one of my spells to force people to calm down. Izuku said. The shock of what had happened in those moments was still in him, and he still could remember quite vividly how people around him almost turned into scared animals the moment that emergency siren went off. It was a good thing that Izuku had created the spell, Ballata Rilaganti, in order to create a sound wave that suddenly calmed people down before their panic would reach a critical point. Well, that I know that heroism could be a little on the exciting side, but maybe this is a little too much. Inko said. Izuku laughed a little at that comment before they changed the topic to something lighter. Izuku had enjoyed his day in UA, and while he had been forced to deal with Bakugo throwing the mother of all temper tantrums that he could throw at him, Izuku wouldn't lie if he said that he had been mentally preparing himself for this day. He had visualized situations like this in his mind a lot of times in the past, and had even prepared one single spell that was created in order to not only counter Bakugo's quirk, but to make sure that he suffered unimaginable pain in case they ended up coming to blows. But in the moment of truth, Izuku defaulted to defending himself first, rather than letting his anger and hatred against Bakugo make him suffer for all the years he had endured Bakugo's villainous behavior. But maybe this was for the best. Izuku knew that a good hero should be one who could keep his emotions in check and one who wouldn't let his negative emotions get the better of them, so maybe his initial reaction of taking a defensive posture in order to give his classmates a chance, rather than doing to Bakugo what he had fantasized about many times in the past when Bakugo managed to anger him, spoke volumes about his quality of character and his worthiness as a hero, more than how physically prepared he was or how good his understanding and mastery of his quirk were. Izuku wanted to enjoy his time in UA as much as he could, and while he knew that society would insist on pushing Bakugo forward into UA as he was someone who was born right, Izuku hoped that the events of today would be the moment in which karma finally caught up with Bakugo. For as much as Bakugo had managed to avoid facing the consequences of his actions for so long, there was no way for UA to keep its title as the best hero school in Japan if they refused to enforce DSPLN on Bakugo after what had transpired today. Izuku then pushed those thoughts out of his mind and tried to relax for the remainder of the day before he decided to go to bed. He needed to rest as much as he could in order to be rested enough to not fall behind in the hero course. The final day of UA's first week arrived, and the first-year hero students faced a special, all-day class. The class? Rescue Training. It was the second joint session this week after Heroic Foundation, and with Bakugo no longer present, excitement was high. This rescue training class would be conducted not in a normal classroom but in a special facility on UA grounds, named the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or the U.S.J., to train them on how to conduct themselves in rescue operations across different scenarios. The thing was that said facility was quite far away from UA's main building, and that meant that they would have to take a bus to reach it. No one was quite upset about having to spend almost 30 minutes on a bus, as people decided to make the most of those minutes by socializing even more. You know Midoriya? Your quirk is quite interesting, to say the least. Izuku heard one of his classmates' voices and looked up to see that it was Itsuka Kendo, the class representative, who said those words. That is quite the polite way to say it. Izuku said. He wasn't used to hearing comments like that about his quirk, as the people that he was forced to deal with were quite critical about his quirk and how it could copy power from others in a way, and he didn't know how to take comments that were quite neutral. Izuku wanted to keep an open mind about his new classmates, as he only knew that Reiko was fully accepting of his quirk, but years of dealing with people who took issue with it had made him somewhat wary of others. Izuku knew that people at the moment were more accepting of his quirk because he had put him to good use to protect them, but he knew that accepting his quirk and tolerating his quirk were two different things. How does your quirk really work? Do you just see someone's quirk and then bam, you get the power to use it? Or there is more than that? Jiroda Shishida said. He was a student in his class with a mutant quirk, and one that was quite an educated individual despite how his quirk could turn him into a brute. No, I don't see a person's quirk and then just put a Spanish name on it to use it. It's more like I observe a quirk and gain an understanding of their inner mechanisms, and that knowledge is stored in my grimoire. I need to combine the knowledge I've gained about multiple quirks to create one single spell, and that creation deprives me of the knowledge that I had used to create a spell. I can also discard a spell that I had created in order to create something similar to it again, but there are some downsides to that approach. Izuku said this was one of the few times he had been allowed to explain how his quirk worked, as many people had the preconceived idea that it could copy other quirks, which put him on the sheet list of a lot of people. That sounds a little like copying quirks, but it's less about fully copying quirks and more like getting inspired by what you see. Setsuna Tokage said. In a way it is. I do admit that combining knowledge of quirks that work in a similar way to create a spell that ended up looking like I'm copying someone's quirk had caused me a lot of social headaches, but trying to combine knowledge of quirks that have little relation with each other will create useless spells, as I can't slap the information of a healing quirk with the information of a fire-spewing quirk to create a healing flamethrower. I mean, I can do that if I start combining more information to make those flames be able to go from harmful to harmless, but in the end, it's easier to try to combine knowledge of quirks that I had seen to try to replicate some quirks that other people had for the sake of simplicity. Izuku said. Izuku's words made his classmates think about his situation, and made them think that Izuku had it somewhat rough with his quirk. A lot of quirks in this world were easier to handle as they only had one use, and that made it simple, but Izuku's quirk could have had more uses, considering what it could do. Everyone, get ready to get out of the bus. We have reached the U.S.J. Vlad King said. Everyone on the bus then saw they were really close to that building, and the conversation was over. This was the time for them to train themselves to become heroes in the future, not to think about Izuku's quirk. Izuku was listening to 13, the heroine in charge of the U.S.J, as she explained what they were going to do today there, when a mysterious portal made of black mist appeared in the center of the main plaza on the U.S.J out of nowhere, and then people with clear hostile intentions started to walk from that portal to their location. What is that? Are they villains? Is this one of Eraserhead's logical ruses? The voices of the students of Class 1A reached Izuku's ears as he focused his sight on those individuals who had appeared. Where is All Might? He was supposed to be here. A man with white hair and multiple faces attached to his body as accessories said. How do they know that? Not even the students were informed about that detail. Eraserhead said. He was looking at the villains now, his scarf ready to defend himself and the students. Vlad King and 13 followed suit and took a combat stance as they looked at the villains with intensity. It's a pleasure to meet you all. We are the League of Villains. I know it's impolite, but we decided to intrude on this haven of justice not only to say hello to you, hero hopefuls, but also to put an end to your dreams and hopes of becoming heroes. We also had come to get rid of All Might, as this could be a fitting place for him, the symbol of peace and heroism in the world, to take his last breath after we had killed you all. The villain that was made of mist, and had presented himself as Kurojiri, said. His tone was quite polite, but his words were filled with malice and hatred toward the heroes and hero students in front of him. All Might is not here yet. Vlad King said. He was keeping an eye on the villain with the hands and the one made of mist, as they looked like they were far more important than they appeared. Then I guess that we will start killing you all to see if we can summon him quicker. The villain with the hands, whose name was Shigaraki, said as he then looked at some of the villains at his side and nodded at them. Those villains had long-range quirks, and it appeared that they would open fire on them, but then Eraserhead used his quirk to deactivate their quirks before they could use them. I see that. I guess that this is not going to be that easy. Kurojiri said. 13 then used that chance to try to use her quirk to create a black hole that she could use to attack the villains. That black hole she fired at the villains may have scared some of them, but Kurojiri was calmly watching it come his way before he retaliated. 13 saw a portal of mist appear out of nowhere and consume that black hole, making it then appear behind her. She had no time to dodge. Sustituto sombrio. Izuku then said as he cast one spell and pointed at 13. 13's shadow then emerged from the ground in an instant and became solid enough to not only quickly shove her out of the way, but to take the hit for her. What the F is this sheet? Those heroes have a controller on their side. Shigaraki said. He used a League of Legends reference to describe someone better suited to support duties, since Izuku's actions could be considered a support role from an RPG perspective, and then looked at the students and saw Izuku with his grimoire open. Kurojiri. Get that controller out of the way. The last thing we need is someone being able to throw buffs at the heroes and debuffs at our team. Shigaraki said. Kurojiri listened to his words and then decided to create multiple portals to spread the kids across the U.S.J, focusing more on Izuku, as he understood from Shigaraki's words that Izuku was a priority target. What the? Izuku couldn't even retaliate as a portal emerged beneath him, sending him into a different area of the U.S.J. That had allowed the villains to temporarily get him out of the way, but some of the hero students were able to run away to safety after being ordered by Vlad King, and only those who weren't fast enough ended up being caught by the portals that Kurojiri created. Shigaraki then ordered those other villains to either attack the heroes or be sent to other areas to deal with the kids who couldn't escape. Shigaraki was frustrated when he saw that there was someone with supportive capabilities on the hero side, and while Izuku wasn't in the proximity after being warped elsewhere by Kurogiri, he was someone who understood that the second most dangerous enemy that one could face was the one that could buff their allies and debuff their enemies. And that lack of knowledge about Izuku's potential made Shigaraki to be more upset about the situation. His plan to kill All Might may have found a roadblock that could be insurmountable. Well, at least I'm now in a place that would give me a chance to warm up a little. Izuku said. That portal that had warped him away from the central plaza had ended up warping him into one of the zones that were inside the U.S.J that was meant to simulate one particular scenario. The one that he had ended up with was the one that simulated an urban environment that is constantly hit by heavy rainfall and strong winds. That portal had warped him in a way that could have been fatal for him, as he was left to fall to his death from a great height, if it wasn't for Izuku's decision to cast Peso Pluma on himself in order to slow his fall down to give him the chance to cast another spell to maneuver his way in the air to properly land on the ground. Peso Pluma may have been a spell that Izuku had used to reduce the weight of things like heavy trash during his attempt to clean that beach or heavy debris when he helped Komori during the entrance exam, but with some creative thinking, Izuku could almost fly while he was under the effects of that spell. It was a good thing that Izuku's body wasn't affected by that strong wind when his body was under the effect of Peso Pluma, as that could have ended with him wildly flying around inside this area with little control. Peso Pluma only allowed Izuku's own body and other spells to interact with the items or people affected by that spell in order to be moved, and that had saved him a lot of trouble. What all of that hadn't saved him was getting soaked, as even if he did all that process in less than 30 seconds, the rain that was pouring on him doused his whole body with water, and the only thing that made him able to avoid having his underwear wet was that the quality of his hero suit was that good. Izuku hid inside one of those buildings, then cast a smaller version of Andinata Ardient to create a fireball to warm up a little. Great that I'm not alone by the looks of it, Izuku said, his hand on the walking cane as he reacted to the sound of footsteps that were getting closer and closer to him. He only relaxed when he saw that Reiko had entered his field of view. Izuku, how fortunate I am to find you here. That villain had created more portals to scatter the students, but almost everybody was able to escape. Reiko said. She started talking with Izuku about what happened after he had been warped away, and while Izuku was happy to see her, hearing footsteps again made him think they weren't out of danger yet. And while Izuku saw another classmate, Kinoko, running in their position, he saw that she was being pursued by many villains. Izuku then aimed his walking cane at the group of villains that were in hot pursuit of Kinoko, and then fired one sphere of energy from the jewel that was on the tip of it to fire a spell that temporarily blinded them. Destello Pyrotechnico, Izuku said, and the sphere then turned into a small rocket that looked more suited to releasing fireworks than the metallic ones Izuku could create with missiles autoguiados. What the? A villain said as he saw the flying paper tube approaching his position, then pulled a knife to cut it in half as it came to his face. That was a big mistake, as the rocket exploded and emitted a massive flash of light the moment his knife made contact with the rocket's tip. Izuku saw how those villains who had followed Kinoko then fell to the ground unconscious, and he sighed. The spell that he had used now had been what had caused whatever bond he had with Bakugo to fracture like it did when they were kids, and while Izuku wasn't stupid enough to let sentiment hold him back, now that Bakugo wasn't on his case, he was unable not to think about that moment when they were kids and how seeing that rocket releasing flashy explosions angered Bakugo to the point of destroying their family's friendship. He created that spell when he was a kid to make Bakugo see how much he appreciated their friendship, making it as flashy and pretty as possible. Destello Pyrotechnico lacked the offensive capability of Bakugo's explosions, and he designed that spell as a fancy trick for summer festivals, but Bakugo's jealousy got the better of him, and that was what led Bakugo to hate him for life. Izuku, Reiko said. She had been one of the few people Izuku had been able to talk to about his hopes, dreams, and issues, and she knew about the emotional weight and the story attached to that spell. It's okay. The Kachin I knew once is already dead, Izuku said, looking at his only friend, then shook his head. This was not the time to get sentimental, as his life and the lives of classmates and friends could be in danger. Bakugo had made his choice the moment that he snapped like that during Heroic Foundation class, and it was now up to Bakugo to live with the consequences of his actions. Komori.do you know if there are more villains outside? Izuku asked, putting himself in the situation while setting aside his previous thoughts, because having fleeting thoughts about his broken friendship with Bakugo when his life was on the line was just asking for trouble. He listened to Kinoko's words about how there were some villains outside the building as she only managed to sneak here undetected before 2 villains saw her, and that made Izuku check on his grimoire to see what kind of spell he could use in this situation to clear the field, and he hoped that what he had in his grimoire would be enough to fight against those villains in the main plaza in case the worst situation came to pass. Finally, Tamura Shigaraki said. He had seen how All Might came to the scene, as he had received the call from one of the students who had escaped outside, which made the hero come here as quickly as possible, and then ordered that black creature that Sensei had given to him, called Nomu, to enter the fray and fight All Might until the symbol of peace was killed. Despite the fact that not only All Might came there as quickly as possible, but the heroes who were there had avoided being gravely injured, the situation wasn't as clear-cut as it might appear to people when they saw All Might coming to deal with a villain. Shigaraki's decision to have Kurogyari first get rid of Izuku with his portals may have given some of the students of UA a chance to escape, as they had seen what those portals could do and had a head start to run away even if some of them were caught in the end. But that influenced Shigaraki's decision to send some of his villains to other areas to deal with those who were sent away, and since there were few kids sent to other areas and the heroes were still in one piece, that forced Shigaraki to keep almost all his forces with him and only spare a couple of mooks for each kid who was caught by those portals. That extra amount of forces, alongside the scare that 13 suffered when Kurogyari almost turned one of her attacks on her, had negated the hero's advantage of being healthy. The only reason Shigaraki didn't send the Nomu at them was that he was shocked into getting his head out of his butt and using some form of strategy after seeing Izuku use his quirk to protect 13 by making her shadow tank one hit for her. His confidence in the Nomu as his trump card waned a little, as his experience playing ranked matches on LOL and having his champions, who were always those that excelled at top lane duty, had taught him the hard way that a support character who could debuff him at the worst possible moment could reduce either his attack power or defense in a situation where he needed to hit hard or tank hits, and get him killed because that debuff ruined his build at the worst possible time. Shigaraki didn't know the extent of Izuku's power, and he called him a controller out of instinct, but he wasn't going to risk it by trying to figure out if he was also a healer or what else he could do. He would get him out of the way to make sure he wasn't in a position to ruin his plans. That cautious approach allowed Shigaraki to force the heroes into a standstill as the Nomu and All Might started to trade blows. There was simply too much cannon fodder keeping the 3 teachers occupied to support All Might, and the threat that Kurogyari posed to 13 after that close call forced the heroine not to use her quirk unless she wanted Kurogyari to try to redirect one of her black holes to either herself or one of her allies. That Nomu has been specially crafted to counter all your power, All Might, Shigaraki said, explaining to All Might how the Nomu was not only matching his titanic might by natural means, meaning that its strength, speed, and natural durability weren't boosted by a quirk, but also that it had 2 quirks inside of it designed to deny the hero any realistic chance to win. All Might put all his power into his fist to test those claims and saw that the shock absorption, which Shigaraki claimed the Nomu had, absorbed much of the force behind his punches. This made the Nomu the only villain, aside from a certain old foe of All Might, able to stand up and continue fighting the hero effectively after taking a direct punch from him. All Might wasn't at the peak of his power as he was used to, as the bite of age even affected a modern titan like him, and the hero found himself in a situation in which he was facing a living punching bag that not only could fight back, but also was prepared to make a fight with him a dangerous endeavor as the Nomu's quirks and natural endurance made his usual method of punching his foes into SBMs not as foolproof as it has always been. Kurogyari, Shigaraki said. He looked at his caretaker and then saw how the man made of mist nodded at him as he proceeded to give support to the Nomu by creating portals made of mist in order to either allow the Nomu to score some cheap shots on the hero or to prevent some of All Might's punches from touching the Nomu. All was going well for the villains now, as the heroes that were forced to fight all the cannon fodder weren't able to quickly deal with them, to try to give support to All Might, but then a rainbow-colored sphere reached All Might's body, went inside of him, and then his body was enveloped by a golden aura. "This is..." All Might said, recognizing that surge of power and the source of it, and then returned to attack the Nomu with a renewed intensity. Shigaraki was shocked to see that All Might's power and speed had been dramatically increased to the point of allowing the hero to punch the Nomu 5 times before it could even strike back, and now his blows were actually pushing the Nomu's back instead of being simply absorbed. "Sheet! That controller is nearby and can buff the heroes. Where is H?" Shigaraki started to say while panicking, as that sudden change on the battlefield alongside that sudden golden aura that All Might had now put him on edge, but then his words died on his throat as a rocket came out of nowhere and exploded on his face, rendering him unconscious after a flashing light enveloped his body. Kurogyri, who was unaffected by that flashing light because of his condition, decided to prioritize unconscious Shigaraki's safety and created a portal to get Shigaraki and himself out of the way, leaving all the villains that came with them behind. They escaped. That man made of mist was immune to the stun effect of Destello Pyrotechnico by the looks of it. The voice of Izuku Midoriya reached All Might's ears, and then he saw how Izuku, Reina, and one of their classmates came on the scene. "My Despota Dragantino should give you the extra juice to deal with that creature, All Might unless you need some extra help," Izuku said, looking somewhat smug at the situation. Then he looked at the villains that surrounded the other heroes and prepared to cast as many spells as needed to take those villains down. "Thanks for the assist, young Midoriya, I won't let it go to waste," All Might said as he redoubled his efforts to beat the Nomu. He felt how Izuku's spell was filling him up with enough power to put him on par with the amount of strength that he had in the past, and now that he was able to fight like he was able to do in his prime, the Nomu was easy pickings for him. The situation quickly turned into a curb-stomp battle for the villain side the moment that Shigaraki and Kurogyri left, as Kurogyri's departure allowed 13 to fight at her full potential without fearing any retaliation. Izuku throwing a couple of extra rockets at those groups of villains to cut down their numbers also helped the 3 heroes quickly wrap up the situation. They then joined forces with All Might, who had punched the Nomu into the ceiling hard enough to send him flying outside the U.S.J., in order to spread out and go to the zones in the U.S.J. to rescue the few students who had fallen victim to Kurogyri's portals. A thing that wasn't truly needed, as those students had managed to save themselves because the reduced number of villains that they had to face made their chances of winning better than expected. The only students who needed help were those who ended up in the flood zone, as the deck was unfairly stacked against them in that particular zone, as none of them could attack the villains that were underwater, and they were almost sitting ducks until All Might pulled them out of the way. It was safe to assume that this joint class in the U.S.J. had been cancelled, but at least they were able to avoid any critical injuries thanks to Izuku's quick reaction when he saved 13 from Kurogyri's counterattack. But this attack was the prelude to something worse that would threaten to destroy the peace that the world was enjoying right now. The whole U.S.J. incident was a surprise, but not in a good way. Izuku said. The second week of school in UA had started, and after being informed about what they would be doing in the coming weeks, Izuku and everyone else were now in the lunch rush cafeteria. Yeah, those League of Villains guys caused quite the stir. They almost won if it wasn't for All Might's intervention. Tetsu said. He had joined Izuku at his table and was talking about what happened the previous day. It was clear that those villains were no match for All Might. But it's quite concerning to see that a group of villains like that had decided to be that bold to sneak past UA defenses to try to attack us. Reiko said. She almost referred to All Might as Uncle Might, but caught herself before she could say it and moved the conversation to how it was quite concerning that a group of low-level villains had become so bold as to do something unthinkable in a world that was so used to seeing All Might as the paragon of heroism and the bane of all villains. Sure. The LOV was quite a menacing team, but let's be real, the biggest threat in the end was the man made of mist and that Nomu guy. The rest were just glorified mooks, and the only one that I can't properly gauge was the guy with the hands. That one looked like a leader of sorts, but he and the man made of mist ran away and ditched their crew the moment that it incapacitated him. That is not a good move if you lead a crew, Izuku said. His entire contribution to the whole fight ended up being saving 13 from being almost taken out by her own Quirk, then drawing enough attention from the white-haired guy to become a priority target and having the man made of mist warp him out of the central plaza, and then to KO Shigaraki and juice up All Might so he could beat that Nomu's, but like that creature owed money to All Might. He had his own opinions about the way things had gone, but it was not like they mattered that much. Yet I know villains can be quite treacherous and cutthroat, but if you want to form a team to fight against heroes, that the last thing you should do is to treat your people like that. Kinoko said. She had been someone who had joined Izuku and Reiko during lunch hour in order to get to know better the boy who had saved her, and she decided to join the conversation now. You have a point, Komori, but that is why low-level villains always strike solo. Those people only care about themselves, and would be quite happy to betray their allies in a pinch in order to get ahead in the game. Izuku said, still holding his chopstick. His final opinion of the LOV was that it was a group thrown together in a short time, and that everyone, aside from the man made of mist and the one with the hands, was quickly disposable. Hell, the fact that the only creature that matched All Might in hand-to-hand combat before his Despota Dragantino tipped the scales in All Might's favor made Izuku question how much of a leader that white-haired man truly was. Izuku wasn't a tactical genius, even if he enjoyed RPGs and strategy games, but there was something bothering him about the whole ordeal. The whole U.S.J attack had been full of holes that became visible now that one had the time to look at the plan in and of itself and its execution. It seemed to him that the supposed leader of the League of Villains was merely a figurehead, someone who had followed a plan handed to him by someone else. The plan itself felt like it could have worked, as the Nomu was almost single-handedly crafted to counter All Might's strengths, but Shigaraki hadn't been skilled enough to cover all the bases, and the failure showed it, with Shigaraki being surprised that All Might wasn't there yet, and how little he knew about the quirks of the students who were there. Izuku couldn't shake the suspicion that someone more dangerous was really pulling the strings from the shadows. He put those thoughts aside as the last thing he needed was to think that there were hidden masterminds in the dark. He needed to focus on his upcoming training for the sports festival to avoid embarrassing himself. As the sports festival was not only a fun activity for the students of UA, but was also a way to present themselves to the world, to both heroes and villains alike. From what Izuku knew, the sports festival was also a chance for those kids in the general course who still aimed to become heroes to manage to transfer to the hero course by delivering an impressive performance in order to impress both the public and the faculty enough to give them a chance to enter the hero course. And while this year there were 2 empty spots in the hero course, something told Izuku that whichever students of the general course coveted a spot in the hero course would rather force one of the students in Class 1B to be moved to Class 1A than take one of the empty spots in Class 1A. With that in mind, Izuku would take all the time that he had left before the sports festival to make sure that he was in peak condition, to make sure that he wasn't going to embarrass himself during the sports festival. The competition was going to be fierce, even if it was a harmless event, and Izuku felt that he would insult those who put their faith in him if he failed to make at least a decent showing during that day. The much-anticipated day of the UA Sports Festival had finally arrived, drawing attention from all corners of not only Japanese society but the whole world. Spectators, both ordinary citizens and those from the world of heroes, eagerly tuned in to witness the spectacle. Across Japan, professional heroes closely monitored the festival, ready to evaluate the kids' performances and identify which promising young students might make valuable additions to their own agencies. Many of these heroes were preparing to extend internship invitations to standout students once the festival concluded, with the intention to establish connections with those kids for future business. Meanwhile, hero students from rival schools watched the competition with equal intensity, closely analyzing it to identify strengths and weaknesses and gain an advantage that could serve them in the future. In the shadows, villains also observed the event, scrutinizing the performances of these potential heroes, but their motives were far more sinister than just wanting to get a head up against a future coworker. 2 individuals were watching the sports festival on TV for different reasons. Katsuki Bakugo, who was now in the living room of his house alongside his parents, sat slouched in front of the television, jaw clenched, and eyes narrowed as the UA Sports Festival blared across the screen. The shock and frustration that Bakugo felt after being expelled from UA for his behavior were starting to settle in his heart, and now he watched the event with bitter resentment and anger twisting inside him. Each time the crowd erupted in cheers for the students, especially when Izuku Midoriya, the green-haired boy who had the role of giving an opening speech as it was his duty as the one who got the best score in the practical part of the entrance exam, Bakugo's anger and sorrow grew even more. That was supposed to be him basking in the glory that he believed was rightfully his, as Bakugo made it to the hero course and believed that it was his destiny to be given that amount of attention and adoration just because he was himself, but the world didn't work as he believed, and the consequences of his own actions finally caught up to him. His parents were unable to look Bakugo in the eyes, as the realization that their methods as parents had been quite lacking, and their lack of involvement and discipline in the past years, when they had heard so many positive things about Bakugo from Aldera, despite the fact that Bakugo's behavior hadn't changed that much from his aggressive self, had allowed the scummy faculty of Aldera to taint Bakugo and made his anger issues, a thing that he had in common with his mother, get out of control too. The point that his inability to healthfully process his frustration and anger, as Bakugo was too used to people doing their best to not make him upset, made him unable to properly act like a normal person and let his anger take control of him and guide him to commit the life-ruining decisions that now had forced him under constant house arrest and to wear a tracking device on his ankle that suppressed his quirk. That guilt that they felt was eating them from the inside, as they had to accept that their mistake of not being completely involved in his education as they were fooled by Aldera's sweet words had put them all in this situation. And then, in another location hidden from many people's eyes, Tamura Shigaraki lounged with predatory calm, fingers twitching as he observed the hero students' every move in order to learn what they could do. Unlike Bakugo, Shigaraki's interest in this event was cold and analytical. He watched not with envy, but with the intent to study, dissect, and understand the quirks and tactics of those kids, especially the one that he had named in his mind as the controller, as it was that lack of information that Shigaraki had about those kids that had ruined his plans during the U.S.J. For Shigaraki, the festival was not a celebration but an opportunity. It was a chance to identify potential threats to whatever future plans he could come up with, or that sensei gave him weaknesses from those kids to exploit, as Shigaraki was quite vindictive, and the fact that those kids had been present during his first big defeat had made him obsessed to make them suffer because of it, and perhaps even future pawns for his own designs, but that last part was more like a pipe dream, as people's obsession with the heroic world made people that were in UA would be one of those individuals that would never be swayed into becoming villains. Now, with Izuku finishing his opening speech, which was quite short as Izuku wasn't someone that liked to grandstand that much during his speeches despite his choice of flashy and showy clothes as his hero costume, the sports festival at UA for all the first-year students was officially starting, and the first event was a relay race. Midnight said, letting her skills as a showwoman shine as she announced the first event the first-year students participating in the sports festival would face. Many students thought it was normal, and one of them even commented that it sounded too easy, but that comment made Midnight show a vicious smirk, and she then decided to shatter that students' hopes. Normal? Haha, you are so naive, boy. We don't do normal here, Midnight said, beginning her speech by explaining that the relay race wasn't as normal or simple as it appeared at first glance. You see, each member of a group that takes part in the race will also have to face one obstacle before passing the baton to the next member, Midnight said, and then, from the ground, the stage on which the race would be held was revealed. It included not only a tunnel but also multiple villain bots waiting after the tunnel to fight against the students who made it that far, a massive drop that had to be crossed by carefully balancing on top of a rope after avoiding those robots, and then a minefield that separated the last participant of each group from the finish line. You will all have 10 minutes to form a team of 4 members and then choose which member will tackle each obstacle. Considering that, the number of students who can advance to the next event will be 44 instead of the original 42, which means only 11 teams will pass to the next event, while the others will be disqualified. So make sure your choice of teammates is not only a winning combination, but that each member is assigned to the obstacle they can handle with the least amount of trouble, so you can finish this relay race as quickly as possible, Midnight said, enjoying the sight of some of the kids panicking after hearing all of that. Two students in Class 1C were looking at the situation with some concern. The first was Shinso Hitoshi, who had only managed to be in the hero course for one day before Nezu unceremoniously kicked him out, under the allegation that he had never earned his spot legitimately and because Eraserhead showed clear bias toward the boy, limiting his expulsion scare to only one student to make a spot for him. Now, Shinso was forced not only to secure a good position in every event, but also to win the last one to reclaim the spot in the hero course that Nezu had taken from him. Shinso was still upset about being kicked out of the hero course like that, and his protest was ignored as Nezu told him that his laughable performance during the entrance exam where he complained and quit during the practical part because his quirk was useless against the robots left Nezu with no doubt about his real competence as a hero student. Shinso was still angry and completely ignored the fact that Nezu told him that if Shinso's performance during that part had been more in line with the other kids, maybe Nezu would have second-guessed his final decision. But Shinso refused to accept that. It wasn't his fault he had been deprived of the capture scarf he used as a weapon to compensate for his quirk's lack of offensive potential by the rules of the entrance exam, and it was unfair for Nezu to expect him to punch robots in the face like other kids with flashy quirks could do. The second student from Class 1C was none other than Nito Manoma. He had been the student whom Eraserhead unfairly expelled from Class 1A, putting a black mark on his record and making that expulsion final. However, he remained at UA as a general course student because Nezu decided to step in and simply moved him into the open spot in the general course left when Eraserhead maneuvered to get Shinso into the hero course. Both kids hated each other's guts. Shinso hated having to share a class with the failure Eraserhead considered unworthy of being a hero, to the point of expelling him to give Shinso that spot in the hero course. Meanwhile, Manoma loathed Shinso for being an arrogant JRK who believed being a hero was his destiny and that the people around him weren't worth the trouble. The behavior of the two boys greatly influenced how they managed to form their teams. Manoma was able to assemble his team quickly, as he made an effort to be social with his new classmates and wasn't rude to them, while Shinso failed to form a team and was disqualified alongside 3 of his classmates from Class 1C, as they refused to team up with him and help him advance to the next event. Everyone in Class 1C and 1A knew about his quirk and what it could do, but those in Class 1C had endured him long enough to hate him for his self-centered personality and constant attempts to put everyone in the class down to prop himself up. Eraserhead was forced to watch from a distance as his attempts to train Shinso and make him more like himself ended up backfiring. While Eraserhead was dour and a loner who barely interacted with other heroes outside his small circle, Shinso wasn't in a position to act like a lone wolf. With his ego overly inflated thanks to Eraserhead's attention, Shinso deprived himself of the chance to team up with anyone else, while students from other classes formed teams within their own classes, with only a few exceptions. Shinso Hitoshi and the 3 students from Class 1C were told to leave the stage after being disqualified. That stung the 3 kids a little, but seeing Shinso's hopes and dreams of returning to the hero course shattered like that made the whole thing worth it for them. Shinso walked off the stage with his heart broken and his hopes of becoming a hero shattered. Maybe things would have gone better for him if he had tried to be nicer to the students of Class 1C instead of thinking of them as losers and lesser people because they failed to impress a hero as he did. With that out of the way, the first event of the UA Sports Festival was about to begin. Katsuki Bakugo's hands trembled in anger as he clenched his fists, watching on TV as the UA Sports Festival unfolded, an event he couldn't join due to an injustice, for his point of view, that left him expelled from UA and under house arrest awaiting trial. The quirk suppressor anklet gnawed at his skin, its cold metal squashing his power and tracking his location for the police. No matter how fiercely he glared at it, the anklet stayed silent as a constant reminder of all he'd lost and of the judgment still to come. He slumped on the battered couch in his cramped living room, the glow of the television painting harsh blue shadows across his scowling face. His parents were unable to even look him in the face now, as the guilt of their inaction as parents had allowed things to go out of control to the point that Bakugo was expelled from UA. The sports festival broadcast blared in the background, the roaring crowd, and the sight of those extras and that shitty Deku participating in that first event did nothing but stoke the fire in his gut that was his barely suppressed anger. Every scene on that TV about how one of those extras or Izuku was doing their part on that race, every second that he heard a teacher comment about any student in a positive way, only made Bakugo angrier and upset at the situation that he was facing now. It should have been him out there, blowing the competition to hell, showing every last one of those losers and worthless extras exactly who was the strongest and the one that would surpass All Might. But instead, he was in his house now, trapped, powerless, a caged animal seething in rage at the situation he was facing, unable to fully comprehend how things had gotten so wrong at UA as he hadn't acted in a different way than he had in Aldera and expected things not change at all. His teeth ground together as he watched the screen, his jaw tight enough to ache as he saw the cameras now focus on Izuku as he had received the baton from Kinoko after she made her way to him after crossing her part of the obstacle race, and then his vision went almost red. Bakugo slammed his fist down in a burst of anger as he started to process that rage, but the impact was swallowed by the sofa cushion beneath his hand, the soft fabric barely yielding a muffled thump instead of the crack he craved. He could almost imagine how, in another life, the blow would have been accompanied by an explosion that would have made his mom call him out for destroying their property for nothing, but now, the quirk suppressor anklet ensured there was nothing but silence. Without his quirk, he felt stripped bare and lesser, just another powerless nobody in the world that wasn't worth anything, and that realization made him sick, leaving him cold and sickened by the void where his explosions should be. None of it was fair. He had trained harder, pushed further, and fought to reach you, only to land here, shackled at home, watching the world move on, Deku standing where Bakugo refused to believe he belonged. He told himself that all of this was somehow Deku's fault. If Deku hadn't acted like he did and had simply folded like the pathetic extra he was, instead of outshining him during the entrance exam and then entering UA against his orders, then maybe things would have been different. Maybe Bakugo wouldn't have flipped out in anger like he did during that heroic foundation class and would have kept his cool. But how could he have known? He was supposed to be the best. He was supposed to win. The world was supposed to recognize his strength, not slap a suppressor on his ankle and lock him away like a criminal when he did what he had always when he felt that. Someone was threatening his position and fought to defend his pride. He refused to accept it was his fault, refused to believe anger and pride dragged him down. The world was wrong here. As the crowd cheered and Deku's name rang out after his strong minefield run, Bakugo seethed, desperate to break free and prove to everyone, especially to Deku, that he would never be beaten. But sadly for him, this was the result of years of incompetence from the adults in his life that had refused to give him a proper education during his formative years in order to fill his head with the incorrect idea of him being the second coming of All Might because of how flashy and powerful his quirk appeared to be, and that had ruined Bakugo in a way that was almost irreparable. Bakugo's tenure in Aldera was filled with yes-men and people who overly praised him for his power and quirk, while failing to instill in him the understanding that what made a hero was also their moral character. Bakugo's explosive nature wasn't tempered by the adults in his life, and that problem was left to fester until it became something that couldn't be fixed now, as he wasn't a little kid anymore, but a teenager who had spent too many years living his life thinking that his childish and violent behavior was the way to act, instead of behavior unsuited for someone who wanted to be a hero that badly. So Bakugo was left to stew in that anger as he failed to fully grasp that these were the consequences of his actions and how the fact that Nezu warned him his behavior wouldn't be tolerated should have been the warning signs that should have given him a clue that the way things had gone for him in the past wasn't going to work here. The date for the trial that would decide his fate was still far enough away to give Bakugo the chance to do some self-reflection as Nezu told him that he should, but from the way Bakugo was behaving now it appears there was little chance for him at the moment to figure out how things had gotten so wrong. Now then, this past event had shown for those teams that had passed, that either you were able to understand your own strengths and weaknesses well enough to tackle the appropriate obstacle or that you were capable enough to surpass whatever was in your way. Midnight said. She looked at the 44 students who had managed to pass to the next event, and saw that all the students of the hero course, 38, considering the circumstances, and 6 students of the other courses had managed to pass to the next event. Well, your efforts are commendable, but now it's time for another trial, one that will serve to separate those who have what it takes to reach the finals and those who don't. Midnight's words took a menacing tone as she then revealed the next event. Villain Raid, one of the students of the general course said. She had been one of those who had teamed up with Manoma, and thanks to Manona's efforts and leadership, their group managed to push forward to this part despite being on the general course. The other two students were from the support course and had managed to hitch a ride to the next event when they joined a team with students from the hero course. Yes. This is, in long story short, a redo of the practical part of the entrance exam, only that there aren't any kitty globes now. You either fight those villain robots to get points or fail this event, and in comparison to the past event, only 16 students would make it to the final event. Midnight said after she heard that girl's question, and then the public saw, from the ground in the stadium, a platform emerged that contained a smaller replica of a fake city partially destroyed by villains. I hope you people remember the rules of the entrance exam because those rules are how you could score points here. Her words then forced some of those kids to remember the entrance exam, and those who made it to the hero course were the ones who figured out the quickest how things would go. To make things more fair, there will not be a 0-point robot here. You will face the villain robots that will give you either 1, 2, or 3 points when you defeat them, and you will have to endure 30 minutes of a relentless assault of those robots. Just remember that heroic behavior during this part will be looked at favorably. Those were Midnight's last words before the students were told to enter the fake city and to take a position before the battle started. This wasn't a team exercise anymore, so the previous teams had parted ways on good terms, but there was now a sense of competition between them, as all the students of the hero course wanted to see how well they would fare now that they had at least some proper training as heroes. All the students who took part in this event held their breath as they waited for the signal, and then, when Midnight told them to get ready, everyone saw multiple villain robots pour out from various directions to fight them. Only those who were prepared for this, or were able to go plus ultra and push past their limits, would make it to the last event of this sports festival. Meanwhile, in a bar, Tamura Shigaraki was paying special attention to this event. A trial by combat that forced those students to fight hordes of robots to use their quirks was the perfect opportunity for him to learn about the kids' quirks and how they used them. The lack of this information had cost him his victory at the U.S.J. While they had managed to gain some notoriety on the street because of their bold attack at UA, their failure to cause any real damage hadn't benefited the LOV much, and Shigaraki was now trying to find a way to increase their street credibility and reputation. Shigaraki was so secure in the belief that the Nomu was all he needed to kill All Might, that when he saw the controller kid saving 13 with his quirk, Tamura almost panicked and ordered Kurogiri to get rid of him to prevent him from supporting the heroes. This move cost him his victory, even though he managed to force All Might to appear sooner when the kids who escaped the U.S.J. called UA. That controller was also a buffer and gave All Might a powerful boost, allowing the hero to overpower his Nomu. Then, the controller was quickly taken out by a strange skill, which forced Kurogiri to remove him from the battlefield. That retreat had somewhat damaged their reputation, as being taken out so easily despite coming to the U.S.J. with the intention of killing All Might didn't give a good impression of him or the LOV to the public. He was going to correct that mistake and make sure. He learned about those kids, as Shigaraki wasn't going to let that humiliation stand and wanted to kill the controller kid because of it. He took a notebook and a pencil and started taking notes on what he was seeing on the TV. His notes focused only on how the kids used their quirks and whether he saw any potential weaknesses that could be exploited. Then, he turned his gaze to Izuku. A grimoire? Shigaraki said. He saw Izuku with his blue grimoire in one hand, focusing his quirk to cast spells that created multiple elemental attacks. That's cool. Shigaraki said. Shigaraki may hate Izuku because of what he did, but seeing Izuku create things like fireballs, gusts of wind, and missiles from his book made the villain jealous of Izuku's quirk. That kind of quirk was something Shigaraki would have loved to possess instead of decay, but it wasn't as if he could do anything about his own quirk. Shigaraki then focused on transcribing what he heard from Izuku's words as he cast his spells, which were in a language he didn't understand, because learning and understanding Spanish wasn't something that Tamura cared about. He quickly described what he saw as Izuku cast those spells, knowing that information was power. If he understood what Izuku could do with his quirk, maybe Shigaraki could find ways to counter it. Shigaraki still paid attention to the other kids and their quirks to avoid leaving any gaps in his information about them, but almost all his attention was focused on the blue grimoire that was part of Izuku's quirk. There was a tense atmosphere in the resting room. The villain raid event was over, and only 16 students had managed to pass to the next event. As expected, almost all of those 16 students were from the hero course. But there were two glaring exceptions. A pink-haired girl from the support course had managed to pass to the next event, as her decision to lend her gear to some of the hero students when they asked was considered heroic behavior and gave her a significant boost to her final score. To be fair to the girl, she also stood and fought those robots, but she used a gun that stunned and incapacitated robots, so all her villain points were those given to her because of the support she had given. Then there was that blonde kid from the general course who managed to push forward and pass to the next event by relying on his copying quirk and his own wits to endure the 30 minutes of fighting. That boy was Nito Manoma. And the way that he went to keep himself powered up, as his quirk had some limitations, had rubbed some of the hero students in the hero course the wrong way. Copy quirks like Manoma's carried a certain stigma. Because people's sense of self was so closely tied to their quirks, copying powers could feel like plagiarism to many. The fact that Manoma had to touch people to copy quirks also heightened the prejudice against him. Izuku was more understanding of Manoma's situation, as he had a copy quirk in a way, but he still didn't appreciate someone trying to get their hands on him to copy his power. Part of Izuku's aversion to people trying to touch him stemmed from Bakugo, who used his quirk to bully Izuku by getting close and releasing explosions as near as possible. This made Izuku wary of people who were that eager to touch others. Because of this, he definitely didn't want Manoma touching him to copy his quirk. Izuku felt somewhat hypocritical there, as he didn't want his quirk copied even though his own power, in a sense, relied on copying others. Still, Manoma gave him some Bakugo-like vibes that made Izuku more wary of him than was probably necessary. He pushed his thoughts aside when he saw the two class clowns of 1A trying to convince all the girls in the hero course to dress as cheerleaders and put on a show for the public. Maybe calling them clowns was a bit harsh, but their attempt to rope the girls into something so foolish didn't give Izuku a positive opinion of them, especially the purple-haired boy, who seemed desperate to get close to the girls no matter what. Izuku was about to say something, but Itsuka Kendo stepped up and told the boys to leave the girls alone and not involve them in their plans. Itsuka could see through people easily and spotted the nonsense those two were trying from a mile away, stopping them before they could drag the girls from Class 1A into anything. Izuku then returned to his own thoughts, focusing on the fact that the next event was a fighting tournament, and that Nito Manoma would be his first opponent. This is it. My time has come. Nito Manoma thought to himself as he walked to the platform that would become the stage for his first fight to reclaim what was rightfully his. Nito Manoma was in Class 1C, not because he failed to perform during the entrance exam as many people did, but because Eraserhead's machinations targeted him during the quirk apprehension test to allow someone who had actually failed the entrance exam to enter the hero course without proving they had earned that right. Manoma's heart nearly dropped the moment Eraserhead expelled him on his first day, and while he was still recovering from the shock, he was called to Nezu's office to discuss his future. The principal told him that his expulsion had been a mistake, one born of the teacher's abuse of authority at UA, who, as part of the school's adherence to non-standard teaching methods, had imposed them on him. Hearing that UA was careless enough to use expulsion methods like that, and how Eraserhead wanted to put a black mark on his record to allow someone he favored to take a spot in the hero course, even at the cost of someone else's future, soured Manoma's view of UA and made him refuse to accept a transfer to Class 1B, as he wasn't sure the homeroom teacher of the other hero course was any better than Eraserhead. Maybe it was unfair for him to think that way, as he didn't know who that hero was or how they would conduct their class. But considering how fresh that wound was when he was given that choice, his decision to go to the general course could be forgiven. Nezu disregarded Eraserhead's attempt to expel him and honored his request to transfer to the general course, but that didn't mean Manoma's ambition to become a hero would end there. No, Manoma had a plan. Manoma trained as hard as he could after class to re-enter the hero course by performing well in the sports festival. He wanted to be seen by the public and the hero community to gain positive publicity. So, in case his next attempt to enter the Hero course went badly, he could use that publicity to transfer to another hero course at a different school. The fact that the boy who had been the reason Eraserhead expelled him was then forced into the general course and loved to taunt him about it filled Manoma with enough spite to push himself forward in training for this day. Manoma also wanted to make sure that the purple-haired boy, who only entered the hero course because Eraserhead liked him, failed to return by taking the wind out of his sails. But it appeared he didn't have to lift a finger after all, as the boy's confrontational behavior with everyone in the class had sown the seeds of his disqualification before the event even started. The last 3 students who could have teamed up with him for the relay race refused to be his partners, preferring to be disqualified rather than team up with him. The look of sheer sorrow and horror the boy showed when Midnight told him he was disqualified was a victory so sweet that even if Manoma failed to impress anyone today, he would at least be happy knowing that Shinso failed in his quest to return to the hero course by winning the sports festival, even before he was given the chance to start. He had a time limit with the quirks he had copied from hero students lounging in the resting room before the first fight started, and he didn't like his chances against the boy who had given the opening speech. Manoma paid close attention to the hero course students as they talked in the cafeteria, looking for any information that might reveal weaknesses he could exploit, but everything he learned only made him accept that he was facing one of the few opponents who were almost hard counters to him. Izuku Midoriya and his blue grimoire quirk had been the subject of Manoma's study at home, after training intensely to figure it out. From what he had heard and his own musings, he believed his chances of winning against Izuku, once he ran out of time with the 3 quirks he had copied, were quite slim. From Manoma's point of view, Izuku's quirk was an emitter type, but one that also had traits of accumulation-type quirks, if what he told his friends about needing to see quirks in action to accumulate knowledge to create spells was correct. Manoma knew from experience that while his quirk could copy accumulation-type quirks, it couldn't copy what that person needed to stockpile to make the quirk work. So, trying to copy Izuku's quirk as a last resort would fail. At best, he could summon an empty book, and its empowering process would take more than 3 minutes. From what he heard about how Izuku creates spells, Manoma, undeterred by those odds, decided to make whatever little time he had with the copied quirks count, trying to gain as much attention as possible from the public to earn the prestige needed to legitimize his place in any future hero course and protect himself from people like Eraserhead. So, as Midnight gave the signal to start the fight, Manoma put everything he had on display to shine as brightly as he could in those fleeting moments, thanks to the limitations of his own quirk. Izuku saw Manoma come swinging as hard as he could. Manoma launched his assault by releasing a burst of electricity to shock him. Izuku managed to go on the defensive fast enough to avoid being shocked or electrocuted. He cast a spell that allowed him to absorb elemental attacks if the source of the attack was a quirk. Gula Elemental. Izuku spoke as a black and red sphere of energy emerged in his free hand and devoured the electric attack. That spell was made to counter people with emitter quirks by absorbing their attacks, as long as they were considered elements from nature. Izuku used the energy absorbed to fuel his own spells. He was sure that Manoma had more up his sleeve, especially when he saw him switch from electricity to fire and ice. Shodo Todoroki saw that from the spectator stands and was upset. He recognized the way that Manoma was using fire and ice as the way that he used his ice with his quirk, and then thought that Manoma had managed to copy his quirk. He clenched his fist in anger when he saw Manoma use fire after copying his quirk. Todoroki considered those flames not his own, but Endeavor's, and hated that part of his quirk. Todoroki thought of the ice as coming from his mother, which made his issues with Manoma feel more personal. The sight of someone freely using the fire that had ruined his life and the ice that reminded him of his mom made Todoroki more upset than he needed to be, but that, in itself, was part of the stigma that people with quirks that could copy other people's quirks had to endure. To see someone using a copy of your power without the emotional attachment made copy quirks something that a lot of people considered undesirable, even if those quirks had more utility. With Todoroki being forced to see someone using his quirk at its full potential when he refused to use his flames out of spite for his father, it only made things more uncomfortable for him. Todoroki hated his father and his flames, so seeing someone use those flames gave more glory and accolades to that BSTRD from his point of view. Back in the fight, Izuku was forced to switch gears. Manoma's relentless dual elemental assault managed to bypass Gula elemental absorption. That spell could only absorb one element at a time. Trying to absorb two forced him to take full damage from both. Izuku remembered that Manoma could copy up to 3 quirks, with his copies lasting 3 minutes. He decided to use a more defensive approach so Manoma would run out of time. Izuku knew Manoma hadn't entered the arena with fresh copies. It felt like a dirty tactic, but villains used such tactics. If a hero student or hero couldn't overcome them, their careers would be short. Izuku used his Andinata Ardient and Vendaval Gelido spells to counter Manoma's fire and ice. He fought fire and ice with even more fire and ice. The public and home viewers witnessed an exciting exchange of fire and ice. Multiple small homing fireballs rained upon Manoma, who, in order to defend himself, had to use the ice from his copy of Todoroki's quirk to erect a wall of ice to block all those fireballs, and then his counterattack with a powerful fire blast was countered by a cold gust from Izuku, which extinguished those flames midway. As Izuku predicted, Manoma ran out of time with his copies and decided to physically attack Izuku. Even if he had run out of time with his quirk, he still hadn't run out of options in this fight. Izuku, in a show of solidarity, decided to respond to his attempt to fight mano a mano by responding in kind instead of simply blasting him away from the stage now that he had run out of time. Was that decision tactically sound? No, it wasn't. But Izuku decided to go with it anyway, as he felt quite sympathetic to Manoma. In a way, he understood the plight of having a quirk like the one Manoma had, and wanted to give him a fair shot as a way to atone for how he thought about him during the past event. Are you mocking me? Manoma took that decision poorly, and that made him more aggressive as a result, but even if Manoma was angrier and more aggressive because of Izuku's gesture, Manoma wasn't able to match Izuku's own physical bulk and combat skills. Izuku's long year of preparation for the hero course, which consisted of cleaning up a beach that had been filled with trash for a whole year, and a lot of that trash was quite heavy, had made Izuku's body stronger, more muscular, and capable of enduring a lot more effort than a normal person. Following All Might's dieting program, which the hero recommended, also helped bulk up a little alongside those efforts, and while Manoma was strong for his age and frame, he wasn't capable of matching Izuku in that regard. Manoma was taking quick punches all the time while his own attacks were dodged. But Izuku wasn't perfect, and he, like everyone else, could slip up at any moment, and considering that this was a situation in which there wasn't any real stake for Izuku, as him reaching the last event was a good enough thing for him, one simple slip in his guard gave Manoma the chance to get one blow at Izuku. Got you now, Manoma said. His fist extended as he was about to land a punch on Izuku's right shoulder, but as his knuckles made contact with Izuku's shoulder, something unexpected happened. The public saw Manoma suddenly back off after touching Izuku's shoulder, and he fell to the ground as if he were dizzy. Izuku, for his part, got on his knees, and then his grimoire appeared and fell to the ground as it started to flicker a little. Is this happening again? All Might thought to himself, as what was happening now made him think about something that happened years ago. Ugh. Izuku tried to regain his composure as his body shook uncontrollably. That feeling had been something that happened to him once in the past. Izuku opened his grimoire, which had fallen to the ground, and saw new black lines appear out of nowhere. Those black lines also made the smaller white lines, which were almost invisible, grow, adding new details to the blue cover of his grimoire. Grimorio del Mimo, Nivel 1? Izuku said as he read the title page of his grimoire, and saw a new title appear below the one that it had by default. Alongside another title that Izuku had almost forgotten was there, but that was understandable, as the first time that something like this happened, he was a kid, and that happened in Island when he shook hands with Reiko's older sister. This situation was similar to what happened there, as he saw a black grimoire appear over Manoma, whose body began to twitch uncontrollably. The reaction that Reiko's sister had wasn't that violent, but maybe that was because Izuku's quirk wasn't that strong when he was a 7-year-old boy. Midnight and Cementos were watching all of that happen, and were about to stop the fight. But then Izuku managed to pull himself together and recover his composure and cast one spell that stopped Manoma's body from twitching uncontrollably. Viento Albo, Izuku said as he picked up his grimoire. And then that gust of white-colored wind enveloped Manoma's body and brought him instant relief. What the? Manoma said. That sudden relief after his body almost had a slide out of nowhere confused the boy a little, and then to see that a black grimoire with small blue lines rested on top of his chest only confused him even more. Manoma got up, then became confused. He pushed that grimoire away, as he believed that said grimoire would only stay there for 3 minutes, and then stared at Izuku with some confusion in his eyes. I see that so your copy quirk is special. Izuku said. Those words caught Manoma by surprise, as Izuku's way of referring to his quirk as special lacked the malice that many people had used in the past to mock it. What are you talking about? Manoma said in a defensive way. Pick that grimoire and read the title page. That may dispel your doubts about what I am talking about if my hunch is correct. Izuku said. I don't think so. That thing would probably disappear in 3 minutes, so why should I bother? Manoma said. He wasn't going to fall for whatever ploy Izuku had, as he believed that what had happened to him just now was a nasty ploy from Izuku to humiliate him. All right then, let's wait 3 minutes and see if that thing disappears. Izuku said, then simply opened his grimoire, which no longer flickered uncontrollably but also showed those new black and white lines in a more defined, aesthetically pleasing manner. Manoma was unsure about what to do now, and then saw how Midnight decided to make a show of that declaration of Izuku to try to keep people engaged in order to make people forget about what had happened a couple of seconds ago, and did the only thing that he could do now that he had no copied quirks to rely upon aside from that supposed copy of Izuku's quirk. Those 3 minutes had passed, and to Manoma's surprise, that black grimoire didn't vanish out of thin air as it had when he copied quirks that created certain objects. His hands trembled as he picked up that black book and opened it to read. What the? Manoma said. He was reading the title page of his book when he came across something that caught him by surprise. What the hell is a grimoire of a blue mage level 1? Those words surprised almost everyone there, aside from Izuku and those close to him, and Izuku decided to explain to Manoma what they meant. That is the name of my quirk, in a way, but written in a language that you understand that I may use Spanish a lot, to the point of making my quirk to change languages between Japanese, English, and Spanish at will, but since you don't understand those many languages, that grimoire shows you things in a language that you can understand. Izuku said. That made Manoma quickly flip the pages of that grimoire and see that almost all of them were empty, except one page. White wind. Manoma said in a shaky voice, causing Izuku to talk to dispel his. That is the name of the spell that I used to heal you when you were twitching on the ground. It appears that you can learn my spells and add them to your repertoire by being targeted by them once, almost like a blue mage on a Final Fantasy game. Izuku said. Manoma was shocked as this wasn't how his quirk was meant to work at all. Impulso Sonico. Izuku said as he cast one of his spells to shove Manoma into the ground to snap him out of his stupor. Izuku could have pushed him out, but he wanted to test the limits of Manoma's grimoire. What was that for? Manoma complained, and Izuku simply told him to check his book again. Then he saw that a new page was now filled with information, and that one was named Sonic Blast. Now then, better be ready, Manoma, as you are going to get a crash course on blue magic from a pro, and that one is the last freebie that you are going to get from me, so better be ready to fight for real, as from now on, all my spells will be used with the intent to kick you out of the stage. Izuku said. His hand was ready on his grimoire, as he was eager to see how this fight against someone who could be his equal could go now. What comes around goes around, and while he wasn't going to test how he could use the Grimorio del Mimo now, he would at least give some freebies to Manoma for that extra power-up to his quirk. This had been the second time that his quirk had suffered an evolution like this, and while the first one gave Izuku the power to better understand quirks so he could create better spells, Izuku wanted to finish this fight and the whole sports festival to train for the new job that his grimoire had obtained after linking up with Manoma's quirk for some reason. Manoma fought as hard as he could, but despite that strange quirk awakening that had enhanced his quirk to new heights that he had only dreamed of, he ended up being defeated by Izuku. Manoma was now in the stands alongside his classmates who stayed in the stadium, and he was congratulated by them for coming this far, But what was capturing his attention now was that black grimoire that had been created the moment his quirk activated when he tried to copy Izuku's quirk out of desperation. Manoma, in the past, had managed to test his quirk's limits even if he had to disregard the law about quirk usage, and knew that copying a quirk that relied on an item allowed him to summon a copy of that item that would disappear when his time with that quirk was over, so now to see that black grimoire in his hand not disappear at all made him feel quite strange. I don't know what grimoire of the mime can do because the one that I got from you is at level 1, like you had gotten the grimoire of the blue mage at that level as well, but considering that it's your quirk, something just tells me that you will be able to figure it out on your own, but something tells me that your quirk now is more powerful than before. Izuku's words echoed in his mind as he watched the next fights at that event. He flip-led pages on his grimoire, something that felt strange, and then started to try to figure out how his quirk worked now after that upgrade, as while all those spells that Izuku had used on him were now permanently part of his arsenal because they were part of the blue mage part of his grimoire, he would rather see what were the new limits that his copy quirk had now. He gazed at the fight in the arena, which was Tetsu against one student of Class 1A whose quirk was akin to a guardian entity made of darkness, and then paid closer attention to how both boys traded blows and how they used their quirks. Manoma was someone who always paid attention to quirks in actions, considering how his quirk worked, but now, he felt a strange compulsion to pay more attention to that display of quirk usage. It was strange, but he felt like he could almost copy those quirks from a distance. Even for that to happen, he needed to get close to someone and touch them. Maybe that strange feeling had something to do with the change that his quirk had gone through a couple of minutes ago. Manoma then looked at his grimoire again as he felt how it started to twitch a little, and then he saw that 2 pages of the 4 that were in his grimoire started to fill up on their own with information about those 2 quirks. Dark Shadow? Steel? Manoma read those 2 pages and then noticed how his body seemed to copy those quirks. This wasn't normal, as Manoma was only able to copy quirks through physical contact, so to see that he could now potentially copy quirks by seeing them in action partially scared him, but also excited him, as that opened a lot of new possibilities for him in combat if he could understand and master this new power of his. Manoma would dedicate this time of rest and contemplation to mastering the power that was now his to wield, hoping that this new power could be the key to becoming not only a hero but also finally able to stand in the spotlight. Izuku was walking back to the stage. It was time for his second fight in this event, and as he walked to the arena, he got closer to a father-son conversation that could be a lot of things. But heartwarming was not. You'd better drop that childish defiance with your refusal to use those flames, and take your next fight seriously, Shoto. The voice of Endeavor, the number 2 hero in Japan, reached Izuku's ears. Izuku decided to just stay away from what looked to be a tense family moment, even if that meant that he would be forced to hear whatever those 2 had to say as they were in the way. I don't need your fire to win against that copycat from Class 1B. Shoto Todoroki said. His voice carried some anger that was being aimed at Izuku because he had seen someone find a way to counter his ice, from the way he had seen how Izuku had dealt with Manoma's copy of his quirk. I don't think so, boy. You saw that fight and how that boy didn't use that Gula elemental move of his again when that blonde kid used your quirk at its fullest potential. That makes me think that move can only absorb one type of elemental attack, and that means your constant insistence on using your ice side only would end with a sound defeat on your part, Endeavor said. The number 2 hero was many things, but stupid was not one of them. Izuku was somewhat surprised to hear that one hero had managed to figure out that weakness of that spell of his, but considering that Endeavor has a massive track record of resolving police cases that had gone cold with his impressive deductive skills, maybe Izuku was being a fool to be surprised by that. It doesn't matter. I will find a way to overpower whatever that stupid grimoire of his can throw at me. I will never use your flames. I will become a hero with my mother's ice only. Shoto said, then walked away from his father, angry and upset that his father had come to pester him again, trying to force him to use his fire against his wishes. Suit yourself, boy. Maybe tasting defeat will change your tune. Endeavor simply shook his head in disappointment at what had happened there, and those were his parting words to his son before getting out of the way. Izuku waited a couple of seconds after Endeavor got out of the way to continue his walk to the main stage for his next fight, and wasn't sure what to think about after hearing all of that. Izuku's interactions with Todoroki were minimal, as they only shared classes 2 times before they were told to train like crazy for the sports festival, and it was not like Izuku cared enough about someone who had shown to be a cold and distant individual who simply stoically glared at others from a distance. From what he had heard, Todoroki had some issues with his quirk and his heroic father by the looks of it, and while that could make Izuku feel a level of sympathy, the fact that Todoroki was willingly holding back his power out of spite for his father and not due to medical issues, as Izuku believed after seeing that scar on one side of his face, irked Izuku the wrong way. To become a hero, one must be willing to put everything on the table to save the day, and while Izuku understood that heroes tended to hold back, the amount of holding back Todoroki was doing and the reasons behind it didn't make Izuku sympathetic to that boy. There may be reasons that elude Izuku's knowledge that would make him feel sympathetic, but the fact was that Todoroki had chosen to be a hero, and if he wanted to become a hero only by using half his quirk to spite his father, then Izuku was going to give him a lesson he would never forget. There was a tense atmosphere in the scenario in which both Izuku and Todoroki would fight. A lot of people had seen how Todoroki had flash-frozen his opponent in order to win and weren't sure if Izuku could do something about it, but then they remembered that Izuku fought against Manoma when he had copied Todoroki's quirk and saw that he was able to defend himself against the output of ice and fire that Manoma brought to the battle. Sure, Manoma's copy of Todoroki's quirk wasn't as strong as the original and lacked some skill, but Manoma did show some understanding of that quirk and showed remarkable mastery of said quirk before the fight switched to a duel between 2 people with the same quirk in a way. Begin. Midnight gave the order to start. And then Todoroki decided to start the fight with the move he used against his previous foe. Todoroki was aiming for a one-hit KO in order to simply overpower Izuku's quirk and then show his father that he didn't need to rely on those flames that Endeavor was so insistent that he had to use, but then saw how a black sphere of energy emerged on the tip of one of Izuku's fingers and completely absorbed that ice attack. Starting a fight with your strongest move? Not a bad idea, but you should know better now that you have seen what I can do. Izuku said. That black sphere turned white, and then Izuku pointed to the ground. Surpriser elemental. Izuku said as that small sphere was fired to the ground, then expanded into a semi-transparent energy dome that covered the whole arena. Todoroki's reaction to that spell was to try again to use his ice, but then something went wrong. What the? Todoroki said as he saw the ice he had created by stomping the ground suddenly vanish, leaving no trace behind. As long as you are inside this dome, you won't be able to use your ice. Izuku said, and those words were almost a punch to the gut directed at Todoroki, who reacted poorly to that information. That's cheating. You can do that. Todoroki said, who was quite altered by the situation, as this was the first time in his life that he had been forced to face someone who completely melted his ice. Are you for real? Will you whine like that when you face a villain that can disregard your ice? You had come here and become a hero student in order to become a hero in the future, and if this is how you react to a situation like that, then give up already and give your spot in the hero course to someone else. Izuku said. His words were harsh, but if Todoroki's reaction to someone nullifying his ice was to cry foul instead of trying to use his fire, then Todoroki had no real future as a hero. You. Todoroki then switched to anger and glared at Izuku. That's a little better, but unless you fight me at your fullest, then you are going to lose, so let's see if you are hopeless without your ice or you can still fight despite being deprived of your main form of attack. Izuku said and then waited for Todoroki to react. Izuku's disappointment became clear as Todoroki's first instinct was to try to throw hands instead of trying to use his fire. Izuku wasn't going to reveal that his Surpriser elemental could only block one element, as Izuku didn't feel that inclined to give him a hand in this fight, as Izuku had little sympathy for him. Izuku may lack the context of that conversation and doesn't know Todoroki's past to understand his decision, but Izuku felt that Todoroki's holding back was an insult to everyone in the hero course who gave their all with their quirks to become heroes one day. Izuku simply sidestepped away from Todoroki and then looked at him with some contempt as he aimed one sphere of energy at his back. Begone! Izuku coldly said, and the sphere then turned into Impulso Sonico, which blasted Todoroki out of bounds with enough force to knock him to the grass surrounding the arena. Midoriya wins, Midnight said, putting an end to that fight that had ended a little too fast for everyone's tastes, but a win is a win. Izuku then calmly walked off the stage, not bothering even to look at Todoroki, who was looking at him with anger after not only defeating him, but also showing that he could make his ice useless. Interesting. That was the only thing that Endeavor could say. The sight of his masterpiece being defeated in such a humiliating manner was quite painful, but maybe it was necessary. Endeavor had never tried to push Shoto to use his fire in such a way, as not even he was that forceful enough to bring someone with an ice-suppressing quirk in order to force his masterpiece to use his fire, but maybe the reality that there were people out there that could make the ice he was so insistent on using completely useless may force Shoto to accept the fact that he needed to use his flames. Maybe that could be a way to force Shoto to use his fire by forcing him into a rivalry with that boy, because if words, threats, or promises never worked to make that boy give up on that spiteful oath of his, then maybe it was spite that Endeavor needed to use to force his masterpiece to give up with his childish rebellion. A plan was forming in his mind now, and since the internship week followed the sports festival, maybe there was a way to create the perfect conditions to finally get Shoto to stop holding back by putting in front of him someone who could become a rival of sorts. A rival that could suppress the ice that he was so obsessed with using no matter what, and maybe that rivalry will make him understand that his decision to hold himself back can only carry him so far before he crashes and burns. The last event of the first-year student sports festival ended with Izuku's victory, and as people watched how All Might came to present the medals to Izuku and the other 3 finalists of the fighting tournament, there was one villain reviewing what he had been taking notes on since the beginning of the sports festival. Tamura Shigaraki had been paying extra attention to every spell that Izuku had used, and while he didn't understand the names, he could understand what they did based on what he had seen, and his opinion about Izuku changed a lot as he took more notes about his quirk. Absorb elemental damage. Create a small area that completely nullifies one particular element at a healing spell and an impressive elemental coverage. That controller is far more dangerous than I thought, Shigaraki said. His notes about Izuku's spells and their effects were filling up that notebook as Izuku used them during the sports festival, and what Izuku had shown made the villain concerned. The only thing that made Izuku not a master of all in Shigaraki's eyes was that Izuku had not shown any spells that could cause any status ailments, but that didn't mean that Izuku didn't have any spells that could do that in store, it just that there wasn't a situation during the whole sports festival that made Izuku rely on any spell that could cause an ailment. In a world in which quirks could only do one thing, someone who could pull off an impressive display of multiple powers with only one quirk was really dangerous, and even if Shigaraki could kill people with one touch, seeing someone being able to summon multiple things as means to attack made the villain to feel somewhat small, because what kind of counter one could make to a hero that had a lot of choices in a fight? Shigaraki needed to return to the drawing board and try to assemble a team that could take out someone like Izuku if he wanted his LOV to make a name for itself. Shigaraki may have cheapened out the first time and just hired as many dumb muscles as he could for the U.S.J., under the impression that raw numbers would surpass the quality of his opponents, but maybe Shigaraki should look now for more quality over quantity. He changed the channel and saw an emergency report about a hero who was permanently injured by stain, which made Shigaraki decide to cook up a wicked scheme. Maybe it was now time to team up with other champions like him instead of relying on low-tier mooks to get his plans done. Congratulations, Izuku. You made it, Inko said. Izuku had returned home after the sports festival, and she wanted to congratulate her son for his victory. To see her son achieve that much, and to know that said achievement will cause a lot of naysayers in Mustafu to shut up, made her extra happy. Inko was kind to many people, even though some had less than stellar opinions of her son, but that didn't mean that she wasn't going to feel happy now at the expense of people who were realizing that they had been constantly antagonizing someone who not only had real heroic potential, but was starting to make his name known to the hero community. Those same things that a lot of people thought Bakugo would easily get, and that is why a lot of people gave that boy preferential treatment over her son. All of this was thanks to not only my efforts, but the support of those few individuals who actually believed in me, Izuku said. His mother told him they would eat today's katsudon to celebrate, but the conversation soon turned to a more mundane topic. Izuku's phone started to ring. "Mr. Yagi? Is something wrong?" Izuku said. He recognized the caller and picked up the moment he saw it was All Might. "Izuku?" Inko said as she saw how her son started to reply to whatever All Might was saying to him with short sentences. The call wasn't very long, but it had to be something important considering that Izuku's expression became more serious as the call continued until Izuku told All Might goodbye. "Sorry, Mom. Mr. Yagi called to ask me if I could use my quirk to help a certain hero who had suffered career-ending injuries that couldn't be healed with what they had at the Hero Hospital or UA. Izuku said to his mom. He was thinking about what All Might had told him about the hero, and while he had no real issue with using his quirk to help others, he had mixed feelings when people referred to what he did with his viento elbow as healing. Izuku knew that All Might called it healing for simplicity as he was aware of how viento elbow worked, but there was a side of him that had some issues with people not correctly labeling his spells. Viento elbow wasn't healing per se, as that spell didn't heal people, it just set their bodies to be in a similar state to what Izuku's own body was, as long as Izuku was in a better condition than them. If Izuku suffered an injury in one part of his body and tried to heal someone more injured than he was, then said person would be healed, to the point that they would only suffer whatever Izuku was suffering at the moment instead of the damage that they had suffered before Izuku used his spell. That meant that if Izuku lost either a limb or an organ, then his viento elbow wouldn't be able to do anything at all to that particular part of a person's body if he cast viento elbow in that condition, and sadly, viento elbow wasn't a spell that Izuku could use to heal himself like its namesake could be used in Final Fantasy V. For what All Might had requested his assistance, Izuku was capable of healing the injuries that could render someone paraplegic with his viento elbow. It was a shame that, for all the people who worked in hero hospitals that had the right to use their quirks, it was up to him to do something like this, but maybe it wasn't like there weren't other people who could do this, but that he was someone who could get it done the fastest. He put those thoughts aside and tried to return to the small celebration his mom and he were about to have for his victory at the sports festival. The only thing that would make things even better now would be if his father could find a chance to give them a call, but Izuku knew his father was too busy with his job in America and that it was important enough to keep him on the clock almost all the time, and he appreciated that he always tried to make at least one call a week to ask how they were doing in Japan. Such was the life of an adult by the looks of it, and Izuku just hoped to not be that distant from those he loves when he starts his own family. The next day of class after the sports festival came, and Vlad King started the homeroom PRD of class not only by congratulating his students for their performance, but also by encouraging those who weren't able to make it to the last event, and by talking to them about the next big important thing that they would do as hero students. Internship week? Itsuka Kendo said. Yes, all the effort you put into the sports festival was not just for show. Those were your presentations to the heroes of Japan, and now I will pass along to you all the internship offers you received as I explain to you how the next week of class will go. Vlad King said as he began leaving stacks of papers on each student's desk. Those papers were offers for them to work for a week at a hero agency as an intern during the internship week. Those stacks of papers were quite modest in size, as a lot of the students of Class 1B made a decent showing of their capabilities during the sports festival, with the villain raid event helping almost all the students who took part in it, as it gave the heroes who saw the festival a clearer vision of those kids' capabilities in a fight. But those that managed to reach the last event were the ones that had the biggest stacks of papers. Izuku looked at one of the offers that were on his stack of papers, and was surprised to see that he had received one offer from Endeavor. Izuku knew that Endeavor was a hero who pretty much had a massive amount of sidekicks that used fire or fire-related quirks, so the fact that he received an offer from that hero despite the fact that his quirk wasn't as focused on fire surprised Izuku. Wait a minute. Izuku thought to himself as he remembered what he heard from that conversation between Endeavor and his son during the sports festival day. You'd better drop that childish defiance with your refusal to use those flames, and take your next fight seriously. I don't think so, boy. You saw that fight and how that boy didn't use that Gula elemental move of his again when that blonde kid used your quirk at its fullest potential. Suit yourself, boy. Maybe tasting defeat will change your tune. Those words echoed in his mind as he looked at Endeavor's offer, and that made Izuku not consider that offer at all. Sure, Endeavor was quite a big name in the industry, and rejecting his offer could mean that he would lose access to the potential networking capabilities that taking that offer would give him, as the truth of the internship week was that it allowed a student to create their own connections in the business by interning with a hero. But Izuku didn't get good vibes from that man when he talked to his son, and it was not like Endeavor was the only hero with prestige in the Japanese hero community that had extended to him an offer. He ignored that offer and then searched for those that came from other heroes that weren't on the top 10 and then found one that actually caught his interest. Mirko, Izuku weakly muttered as he read that offer. Paying attention to the hero community was something that a hero student should do, and that name came to mind as it came from an upcoming female heroine who was a little of a trailblazer in the Japanese hero community, as she was someone who was a freelancer heroine that wasn't affiliated with any agency or worked with any other hero. She was a lone wolf or rabbit in this case, considering her quirk, and while she was starting to make waves in the industry despite not being in a great position in the hero rankings yet, Izuku felt curious about what someone like her, a professed lone heroine who refused to team up and create an agency, wanted to do with him. It could be a lot of things, like simply wanting a sparring partner or whatever, but Izuku was sure that it would be far better than whatever Endeavor had in mind with that offer. But he still had time to make a final decision before the end of the week, so he would at least give it a couple of days before committing to an internship offer. He still had to deal with trying to help the hero who got injured by Stain before thinking about accepting an offer. So when classes were over, he would go to All Might and Nezu, who was the one who asked if it was possible for him to help that hero, and get it done before even thinking about the internship week. The world, in the way that Tenya Ida knew it, was broken on the day the sports festival came. His beloved brother had been a victim of a villain's attack that had put an end to his heroic career, as the injuries inflicted by the villain were too severe and could not be healed with what the heroes had at hand. The shock of that event was still weighing on his mind, and knowing about it made him lose his focus during his fight against that pink-haired girl from the support course, costing him his victory. He was too distraught to properly fight back against her support tools. Tenya had closed up to others after what happened to his brother, to the point of being almost frozen in time, as even when their parents told him that UA had come to them to offer their help to help Tensei to return to the field, he was so distraught to what had happened to his brother to even process what had been told to him. Stain, the hero killer, was in Hosu now, and he had decided to harm his brother just to make an example out of him in his mad crusade. For Tenya Ida, what that villain had done was unforgivable, and that filled him with anger and hatred. For the villain who had dared to harm his family. Tenya's heart demanded justice and retribution for the villain who had almost killed his brother in order to spread his vile message to the masses, and as he looked at the offers that he had received, a number that wasn't that bad considering his lackluster performance in the last event. He found out one that would take him to Hosu in order to be on the hunt for the villain who had dared to destroy his brother's career. Tenya wasn't that close to anyone in the class. It wasn't like he was antisocial or anything, but his rigid behavior alongside his obsession with adherence to the rules didn't make him a popular choice in class to hang around. Even that didn't stop some of his classmates from being worried about the situation. Eraserhead would have paid attention to that as well, as the man wasn't blind if it wasn't for the fact that he was overwhelmed by sadness at the fact that his apprentice, Shinso Hitoshi, had fallen into a deep depression after the sports festival, after the way that he got himself eliminated from the competition. That stopped Eraserhead from doing the basic job of simply vetoing that offer, as it put Tenya on the hero killer's hunting ground and gave that boy the chance to find the hero killer and confront him. That didn't mean that Tenya would be fortunate enough to find the hero killer, but the best way to avoid a situation like this was to keep people far away from each other, and keeping Tenya Ida from the city in which the hero killer was located would have spared a lot of people from a future headache. Izuku walked away from Hosu Hero Hospital after using his Viento Albo to heal Tensei Ida's injured body in order to have him return to the hero workforce. However, Izuku had to wait until the beginning of the first day of the internship week to do so, because Izuku's quirk wasn't a healing one by definition, which made the process of going there and offering his help more complicated. Even if All Might himself vouched for his quirk's healing potential, there had been a lot of paperwork for Izuku to go through before he could offer his help, as hero hospitals didn't consider it proper for people to use their quirks to help others, even in special situations. Only those given a special permit were allowed to use their quirks to heal others in hero hospitals. My apologies, Midoriya. I wasn't aware of this when I told Nezu about what you could do with your quirk to help Ingenium. All Might said. The hero was well-intentioned when he told Nezu about the situation and how Izuku's Viento Albo works, something he knew all too well from personal experience, as he felt some concerns about what had happened to Tensei Ida and didn't want a young hero like him to have his career cut short like that. But despite the fact that Nezu saw the logic behind All Might's words and Izuku didn't have any issue helping, there had been quite the bureaucratic mess to get Izuku to help a hero in need to heal him up, while the methods that were around weren't good enough. No problem that I said I would help, and even if I wanted things to get over quickly, at least now I can go where Mirko is to start my internship. I'm curious about what made that lone rabbit want to offer an internship despite the fact that she isn't a team player at all. Izuku said. He was carrying 2 suitcases, one with his hero costume and the other with some day-to-day products, and while he would have preferred to be on the train to Osaka, as the heroine told him that she would be there waiting for him after he took her offer, he was happy to see that he had helped someone in need. Osaka, that brings back some memories. All Might said. Did something happen there that caused a strong impression in your mind? Izuku said. That made All Might chuckle a little. Yes, that you could say that. All Might said. The memories about the underground masquerade and how he managed to defeat almost 100 villains in one fell swoop came to his mind now for some reason. That incident and the mess that came up after had been something that had almost vanished from his mind, but now that Izuku told him about how his destination for his internship week was Osaka, those nearly forgotten memories returned to his mind. The hero still hadn't managed to find out who the brown-skinned girl with the tiger mask, bunny ears, and school uniform was. The hero wanted to find out who she was in civilian life to try to return her to the path of righteousness, but he barely had time to do so, and with the incidents that followed that fight, that memory of that feisty girl faded from his mind alongside his intention to find and reform her. That sounds like an interesting story, but I need to get to the train station now. I don't know how forgiving Mirko would be if I get late to where she wants me to be. Izuku said. Yet you may be right. I can drive you to the train station if you want. All Might offered. That would be appreciated. Izuku said as he accepted his offer and then got into All Might's car, which was pitch black, had tinted windows, and looked like an expensive supercar for some reason. That was All Might's private vehicle to try to drive discreetly, but the fact that his car managed to draw all the eyes around it because of its impressive design, that then maybe it wasn't as discreet as All Might wanted to be. The short trip to the train station in Hosu from Hosu Hero Hospital was long enough to allow Izuku to ask what was going to happen with Stain now that he had gone public with his intent to stay in Hosu to hunt down fake heroes. All Might revealed to Izuku that Endeavor was forming an operation to have himself and other heroes who answered his call to comb Hosu, which would start at the end of the internship week, in order to try to find and capture the hero killer before he ran to another city or killed or maimed someone else. All Might, concerned with the situation, would join the efforts of capturing Stain on his own, as All Might wasn't sure how Endeavor would react if All Might directly joined him in his operation to capture Stain and didn't want to try to undermine his authority if he was there. Izuku, for his part, didn't care too much about the situation with Endeavor, as the bad vibes that he got when the hero talked with his son didn't give Izuku a good opinion of the man. Maybe it was because All Might had been a part of his life, in a way, since he became friends with Reiko, but there was something in Endeavor that made Izuku feel that the man who was behind All Might in the hero rankings wasn't as heroic as his position in the rankings could give the impression. Izuku didn't want to judge people only on gut instincts, as one should never judge a book by its cover, but his gut feeling didn't make Izuku have a positive opinion on the hero. Thanks for the ride, Mr. Yagi. The rest is up to me. Izuku said that when All Might had parked his car near the train station in Hosu, he got out and made the rest of his journey on foot and by train. Izuku held those 2 suitcases as he completed the transactions needed to ride the train, then waited for his train to arrive. There would be some train changes along the way for him to get from Hosu to Osaka, but that was the price of still being a minor and not having a personal means of transportation. Izuku didn't want to take advantage of All Might's generosity and have him take him to Osaka in his car, as he knew that All Might was a busy man and Izuku didn't want to bother the hero too much, so he just hoped that Mirko was a forgiving person, as it was clear that he would be late to their meeting. Izuku had reached the meeting point in Osaka, which was an empty parking lot near a hotel, and he saw that there was no one there, not even a car. That made Izuku somewhat wary, as the hotel that owned the parking lot was quite popular in the area and was almost always busy year-round. Izuku left his suitcases on the ground for a second to check on his surroundings, thinking that maybe there had been a signal or something that he had missed when he came there, but then he picked up the sounds of something coming at him at high speed, and Izuku reacted on time. Guardia final. Izuku said as he quickly turned toward the direction the sound came from and created a small energy dome to block a diving kick from a not-so-mysterious attacker. Your senses are sharp at least. Roko said. She had ordered the people around to move the cars in this parking lot, as she was going to test Izuku after making her wait 30 minutes. Mirko wasn't crazy enough to try to directly attack Izuku at full force with the intention to harm, as her dive kick was aimed in a way that Izuku would barely be able to dodge it in case he wasn't fast enough to react, but she didn't expect Izuku to pull an energy barrier out of nowhere. Izuku then put an extra effort into his Guardia final and lightly pushed Mirko back. The heroine did a graceful backflip in the air before she landed on her feet. Is this your idea of a work interview? Izuku asked, his grimoire now fully summoned, and he was waiting to see what the heroine had in mind before taking an offensive stance. Yeah, let's go with that. Those tricks of yours are interesting to say the least, but I want to see what you are made of, kid. After all, you won the sports festival, but I want to see if you have what it takes to keep up with me. I can't have you being a dead weight that would slow me down, so either you are capable enough to be with me or not. Roko said. Was this cruel? Yes, but at the same time, this was kindness on her part. Mirko was someone who had her fighting style figured out and preferred to fight on her own, as that meant that her F-ups won't screw with others, so if Izuku wasn't able to fight in a way that the heroine could consider effective, that would slow her down, then they would part ways and let Izuku return to his life, wasting his internship week, but at least sparing him from whatever trouble the heroine was going to get herself into. Okay then. So how do we do this? Izuku said. That level of aggression that the heroine had shown almost reminded him of Bakugo for a moment, but the fact that Mirko showed herself to be a reasonable person despite that surprise attack, and framed the whole thing as a test from her part, made the whole thing more palatable for him. Sure, Izuku would have preferred for her to tell that to his face, but Mirko was a heroine who was more used to kicking villain and wasn't too big on talking, so maybe this was just her being true to her character. Great. You are quick on the draw. I like that. Mirko said with a grin on her face. She then decided to explain to Izuku about how he could impress her enough to let him be her intern for this week. Let's keep this simple, you just have to land a blow on me. I will fight back of course, but I will be reasonable with the amount of strength that I use to defend myself. Can't go feral here unless I want to pay for damages out of my pocket. Mirko said. Fair enough. So, are you going to give me a signal or? Izuku tried to say, but was interrupted when he dodged an incoming attack from Mirko. Get ready, kid. Move it or lose it. Mirko simply said as she then engaged Izuku in close combat, or at least her definition of close combat. Mirko was someone who relied on her incredible leg strength, animal-like instincts, and superior hearing, attributes that her quirk, Rabbit, gave to her, to perform in the field, and while she was pulling her punches here, she was still a formidable combatant that relied on her natural gifts and training to make sure that Izuku wasn't going to get an easy pass on her test. Izuku fought really hard, while also paying attention to his surroundings, as Mirko's words about not wanting to pay for damages made Izuku also be mindful of his spells to avoid collateral damage, but that also meant that Izuku was holding back the spells that could give him an easy victory. Impressive, but that isn't good enough. Mirko said. They had both been doing this for almost 20 minutes, and while Mirko was willing to admit that Izuku wasn't that bad for being a first-year kid, Izuku wasn't landing a hit on her, and she was going to put an end to this for the sake of both of them. The preparations are complete now, Izuku said as he opened his grimoire, showing how multiple spectral pages emerged and fused into a single page. That show did distract the heroine for a second, but she wasn't stupid enough to let something like that distract her. in case it was a strategy to drop her guard. "What are you doing?" That was her only reply to that strange display. "Libra Tequesa," Izuku said as he then closed his grimoire, and then turquoise lightning ran through his body, making it glow and emit a soft light. And then Mirko was surprised to see how much of that turquoise electricity was gathering in his ears to make it look like he had grown rabbit ears like hers out of nowhere. "What the?" Mirko was only able to see that as she saw how Izuku then rushed at her at top speed, a speed that was almost inhuman, and one that reminded Mirko of her own, and Mirko had only a couple of seconds to jump away from Izuku's path. Izuku quickly reacted to her jumping into the air and quickly followed up by jumping in order to pursue her. That caught Mirko by surprise, and she retaliated with a little more force than she wanted to use as she used one of her ultimate moves out of instinct. She performed a cartwheel in the air with her legs extended in order to do her Luna Ring move, and barely caught herself in the act as she tried to redirect her body in the air to not deliver a full-powered blow to Izuku, but Izuku did something that surprised her. "Imitation," Izuku said as he then performed the same motion that Mirko did to perform her Luna Ring, and managed to successfully copy her ultimate move on the spot in order to sneak a kick to her stomach that pushed her a little out of the way, and managed to deliver a blow that fulfilled the condition that Mirko imposed on Izuku to let him be her intern during this week. "You made it up, but what had you done there?" Mirko said as she landed on the ground after taking that kick in the stomach. Izuku's kick wasn't as strong as hers, but to see how that boy copied the motions of her ultimate move shocked the heroine a little. "My quirk allows me to stockpile knowledge of quirks. I can use that knowledge to create something akin to magic spells by using all that stockpile information to create one spell. And normally, I wouldn't be able to do what I had done just now, but the limits of my quirk had been lessened a little after that fight with Manoma," Izuku said. He had always been able to stockpile information about mutant and transformation quirks, but he had never been able to use that info at all. But whatever happened to his quirk when Manoma made contact with him allowed him to break through that barrier that made all that information of mutant and transformation quirks nearly useless for him. Libra Tequesa was the first spell that he had created that used a mutant quirk as a base, and that made him create a spell that worked as a transformation quirk of sorts that he used to temporarily boost his body to work in a similar way to how Mirko's body works in order to keep up with her speed. The lightning that came with that spell was what stimulated his body to give him that burst of strength and speed that allowed him to catch Mirko by surprise. "I see that a promise is a promise, though, so you are my intern now," Mirko said. She was still shocked, as that lightning that coursed through Izuku's body wasn't just for enhancing his body, but also as a weapon to use against villains, but a part of her was excited to see someone who had been able to copy her in order to get a win against her. She hoped that this would be the start of a fruitful internship for both of them. Osaka, located in the Kansai region of Japan, is the country's third-largest city and a major economic and cultural hub. Characterized by its dense urban core, extensive transportation networks, and thriving commerce, Osaka stands as a testament to modern Japanese urbanism. The city features a harmonized blend of cutting-edge skyscrapers, historic districts like Namba and Shinsekai, and a renowned culinary scene that draws visitors from across the globe. Its core identity remains largely unchanged despite the emergence of quirks and the changes they brought to the world at large, as the infrastructure that made Osaka what it was endured the chaotic times quirks imposed on the world before the situation calmed down. The city remains a vital nexus for business and industry, as it evolved to accommodate the new reality of this world and the quirked individuals that are quite common to see. Quirk-related incidents are managed seamlessly by local hero agencies and law enforcement, ensuring public safety without disrupting the city's daily rhythms. But that didn't mean that Osaka hadn't been the backdrop for villainous actions. The most infamous one is the now-defunct Underground Masquerade. The Underground Masquerade was an illegal event that not only organized guerrilla fighting tournaments that pitted fighters against each other, but also ran the books for the betting audience, and was quite the hub for illegal business like illegal gambling, quirk-boosting drag trafficking, and even the hiring of villains to have them act as killers for hire. The stain that this villainous event brought to Osaka was one that acted like a black mark on its reputation, but there was little that the average Osakan hero or police officer could do about it during the time that it was active, as it was run by a dark and sinister figure who only allowed it to exist as long as it brought him the benefit he wanted. A group of unsung heroes in Japan, and one heroine during the wildest time in her life, managed to bring about the destruction of the event. Even though it was All Might himself who came to Osaka and defeated almost 100 villains at the same time to close that villainous shop for good, it was the bravery and decisions of those heroes that created the opportunity that ultimately put an end to the underground masquerade, or at least that's what a few people thought. The rabbit hero, Mirko or Rumi Usajiyama, as that was her civilian name, had come to Osaka after hearing from some villains she'd defeated that someone was trying to revive the underground masquerade, possibly even celebrating it in the same place. That information prompted her to move to Osaka this week to see if those rumors were true or false, and to put an end to them if they were. Mirko had an interesting past before becoming the heroine she is today. In middle school, she was known as a hooligan, only avoiding being a petty school bully because she refused to harm people weaker than her out of principle. She constantly started trouble for herself by infiltrating fight clubs and joining almost any fight she saw to put her own strength to the test and to become stronger, to the point of being expelled from her school. This continued into her high school days, where her attraction to fighting arenas led her to the underground masquerade, a part of her past that Mirko felt some level of shame for, not because of what she did there, as she was only fighting people to prove her strength, but because she let her temper get the better of her. It drove her to do things that could have ruined her if she had been caught, if it wasn't for the events that ended with the closing of said masquerade. Maybe it was because of her talk with that Ripper guy, or maybe it was because she saw All Might in action, but Rumi felt that she was wasting her power acting like that, and decided to clean up her act after the whole ordeal in order to become a heroine. All those past fights had been only for the sake of her desire to get stronger and test her mettle against others, but the one on that day had a greater meaning behind it and made her feel that she had actually done something right with her life despite her predisposition to fight. So when she let Izuku into the hotel room where he would stay so he could leave his suitcases, a separate one from hers, as it would be not only improper for them to share a room but also would catch the attention of some less than well-meaning press if they heard that she shared a room with a young minor of a different gender, Mirko took Izuku to the best place to garner information about those rumors of the resurface of the underground masquerade, and was somewhat conflicted when she heard from the head of the Osaka Prefectural Police that yes, not only those rumors were a thing, but they were somewhat true by the looks of it. We have found strange masks when we detained some of those villains, and one of them spilled the info about why they had it in their possession when they were captured. The head of the Osaka Prefectural Police, a woman with a snake tail and tan skin, started to speak, wanting to inform Mirko about how they had learned of the underground masquerade's reappearance, but Mirko cut her off. The only known rule is that all those attending this event, whether they are fighters or spectators, or those wanting to do business there, all must wear a mask that hides their faces to hide their identities, or there will be dire consequences for those who don't abide by that code. Mirko's words surprised that woman, as she was about to talk about that part. That let's say that I do know a lot about the underground masquerade from live experience, Mirko said when she saw the look on that woman's face. Neither the heroine nor the head of the prefectural police decided to continue that conversation and moved on to discuss what information the Osaka police had about the underground masquerade. Though we had managed to find the location of one of their entrances, and this time, it appears that the underground masquerade is located in an underground location that is hidden in the area in which one of the ports in Osaka is located. Mirko was surprised to hear that. The previous location of the underground masquerade was right in the middle of Osaka, hidden behind a simple parking lot. We need someone who could be our eyes and ears there. But the people who check those who try to enter the underground masquerade are more thorough this time, and they do quite the body check to sniff out any kind of device that could be used to gain information from the inside. Izuku heard those words as he was busy checking his grimoire. He wanted to ask questions, but knew better than to try to butt in on a conversation like that when he was just a simple greenhorn. The conversation went from there to Mirko asking about what was stopping the heroes from going in guns blazing and capturing as many criminals as possible. The reply she got was that the police wanted to gather evidence on some of the other crimes committed there, and that heroes rushing into the place and fighting the villains could destroy some of the evidence. Also, Some of those villains mentioned a self-destruct protocol that would kill everyone inside the perimeter if a hero or the police managed to sneak in. So, you wish for someone to be able to sneak up on something like a recording device, but that would be able to find as much information as possible about what is done there. Izuku said, as both women discussed the ways they could enter and the merits of each. Yes, that something like that would help us, but it's not like we had tried. Izuku then picked up a magazine on her desk and put it between his grimoire before making it disappear. That surprised the head of the police, as Izuku then summoned his grimoire, and then everyone in that room saw that the magazine was still between the grimoire pages. It's not like I can sneak a big recording device, but if you made something like a mask that I could fit in the space that my grimoire occupies, and then close it and desummon the grimoire, I can technically sneak smaller objects without being suspected. Izuku said, "Are you implying that?" Mirko seriously looked at Izuku, having seen that display and not liking what she had seen. Offer to sneak inside the underground masquerade 2.0? Maybe, because it's clear that we don't really have too many choices there, and sometimes, heroes have to take a risk to save the day. Izuku said. There was a silence in the room as both women didn't want to admit it, but maybe Izuku was their best chance to be able to put an end to the underground masquerade. Fine, but don't do anything reckless there. Just go there as a spectator and don't draw too much attention to yourself. Mirko said. The head of the police was almost shocked to hear that, as Izuku was still a kid from her point of view, and she wanted to say that she wasn't going to allow a kid to put his life in danger. But then she looked at Izuku's eyes and saw that they were filled with a determination that wasn't something that could be seen in a normal kid, and decided to relent after making sure that Izuku promised to her that he would simply back out if he felt that he wasn't prepared for this. Don't worry, that I will manage. It was a peaceful night at one of Osaka's major ports. The scene was bright and beautiful, yet cold for the two poor souls standing guard. Their job was critical. They had to stop heroes or police from sneaking in and discovering the secretive, illicit activity beneath the entrance they protected, a responsibility that made them especially vigilant and defensive. Get the F out of here, punk, one guard said, kicking a low-level criminal who tried to enter the perimeter without following the golden rule of the underground masquerade. While the motives behind the revival of this event weren't known to the public, the original rule still stood. One had to come masked to hide their identity, or they wouldn't be allowed to enter. Let's go, boss, that underground masquerade thing isn't worth the hassle, one of the minions of that thug said as he helped his boss to get up from the ground and took him away from the place to avoid trouble. Those two walked away and saw a kid with black hair and a blue domino mask covering his eyes approach them before he moved to deal with the guards. What do you want? You don't look like you are from around here, one of the guards said. That boy simply smirked and then decided to speak. I have a less than healthy appreciation for blood sport, both the classic American movie and seeing people beat each other to the point of death just to entertain the masses. I also have some money to spare and want to have a good time, both watching people fight to the bitter end and trying to make some money on the side with some good old betting on who would win or survive, the boy said. His confidence and poise were quite clear, and those guards could sense that what was in front of them wasn't someone who had stumbled there by accident. No, that boy had come there for a reason and was quite honest and open about it. I see that you wear a mask and know what it's all about, so we'll make a quick inspection of you before letting you pass, just in case. The other guard said, using his quirk to see if that boy carried anything that could be considered dangerous, and after a couple of minutes, they let him inside, since he was good to go. Try to have fun there, but don't cause any trouble down there. You wouldn't like what would happen here to troublemakers. That boy had heard that warning before entering a secret passage that led to an elevator that would take him underground, and then waited for the slow elevator to reach its destination. There was a tense silence in the area, where disguised police vehicles were parked, as the heroine Mirko waited for Izuku to make contact with them. Izuku had picked up black dye to change his hair color and a cheaply made replica of his mask to pass the guard's inspection, and was waiting with bated breath for Izuku to switch masks and get in contact with them. Mago Azul here that I managed to enter, and I had changed to the mask that the police had given to me in order to communicate with you and let you see and hear what is going on there. Izuku's voice came from her communication device, and Mirko breathed a sigh of relief. But remember, kid, just be there to act as our eyes and ears there, Don't do anything reckless that could put your cover in danger. The head of the police said. She had brought along a special group of police officers equipped with assault gear to enter if things got sour, but they hoped things would play out as normal. Copy that. I will go radio silent now as the elevator has reached its destination. Wish me luck. Those were Izuku's last words before the communications were cut off, and then the police officers in charge of the computers managed to get the lenses on that mask and the acoustic devices to let them see and hear what was going on. What they heard and saw disturbed them, as it was a den of scum and villainy that had been allowed to fester and grow under their noses, and it was only thanks to Mirko and Izuku that they had come this far now. The only reason that they couldn't enter there and go guns blazing was that the threat of a self-destruction device in those facilities meant that they could put more than their lives inside that place in danger. They hoped that they could convince the HPSC to mount a large-scale operation with heroes using the information they could gather now so the police could gain the resources to put an end to this villainous hideout, but now all their hopes rested on Izuku's shoulders, who was putting his life on the line to help everyone here now. This is quite obscene. A police officer who was using a computer to let Mirko and the other officers see what Izuku was seeing now, thanks to the spy cameras in Izuku's mask, said as the recording showed the level of depravity and villainy at that underground location. Izuku was being quite discreet in the way that he moved to not garner too much attention to himself, but he made sure to put his sights on almost everything that was being done there for the sake of documentation, and it was clear that there was more than just fighting underground tournaments and the trade of illegal drags. The masks that everyone was forced to wear prevented them from being able to fully identify the people there, but one of the devices that had been put in that mask allowed them to record sounds. So while they may not be able to know who they are because their faces are covered, that the sound of their voice could help them to find who they were in the future. Izuku went to the area where the fighting tournament was being held after a discreet, quick walk to the facility to avoid blowing his cover too much, then took part as a spectator to enjoy real fights between pit fighters while gambling with the money that had been given to him as part of his cover. Yes, Izuku was forced to participate in illegal activities to maintain his cover, as telling those guards that he came to see people fight and then make some bets, only to not do them, could arouse suspicion, but it was far more understandable in this situation, as this was done in order to further the police investigation about the underground masquerade, and it wasn't like heroes in the past hadn't gone undercover and had been forced to do some illegal things to keep their covers up. So Izuku made sure to make a quick glance at the fighters that would come next, and then made a safer bet in order to make sure that his cover was solid, and then stayed on the audience side to make it look like he was paying attention while he was in fact trying to discreetly look and hear about other illegal activities done there. For now, things were going well, but Izuku would be foolish to expect this to go perfectly and keep in the back of his mind the idea that he may have to fight his way out of this place if he was discovered, if that self-destruction device would give him the time to do it. The sight of two villains who were high on drags and trigger fighting for the sake of entertaining others while their screams echoed in one of those police vans was quite something that felt bittersweet for Mirko, as she had been there once when she was in her high school years. And while she had put those years behind her after that fight in Osaka that allowed her to see All Might in action, she could still see herself in that environment as she saw those people fight to the bitter end. Mirko had donned a wrestling mask with a tiger motif when she took part in the original underground masquerade and was known as Tiger Bunny during her stint there. She remembered vividly how she kicked her way up in those pit fight tournaments and how even she got into a fight with people in the audience that came to her with the intention to fight her, and while she felt some shame about them, she wasn't unable to admit to herself that those were some of the best times of her life before becoming a heroine. This whole week of waiting had been worth it. Mirko heard a police officer's voice, looking at one of the laptops that was recording what Izuku was seeing, and she almost sighed in frustration. The HPSC had barely bothered to help them at all because there was no hero behind the investigation, and it took Mirko herself to join them to get the HPSC to give them any kind of support, and that support came almost too late, as this was the last day of the internship week and Izuku would return to UA tomorrow, but they at least got something, considering the fact that the HPSC was giving a lot of support to Endeavor and his call for a manhunt of Stain in Hosu, and that was better than nothing. That was the cruel reality of this heroic obsessed society. That even if the police were important in a way, they barely get the resources that they could use to take down villains themselves, because that was the job of a hero. If the police received extra aid to deal with certain villains or criminal organizations, it was because they had jumped through all the hoops required. Or because a high-ranking hero put their name in that operation, which prompted the HPSC to be more collaborative. Mirko would have liked to join the hunt for Stain in Hosu, but she knew that abandoning the police in Osaka now would set them back, so she decided to focus on this to make sure that she would be able to close this chapter of her life on a higher note than her teenage self overindulging her desire to plant her foot on Stain's ribcage. The situation settled down to carefully recording the video and audio evidence Izuku was gathering for them, and for a couple of hours, things went quite smoothly. But then something happened. "Sheet," Izuku said. He made sure to keep his voice as low as possible, but what he had seen in the pit had unnerved him. For a split second, Izuku's breath caught in his throat. A new fighter had entered the pit, and that person was someone he never expected to see at all, Bakugo. The familiar scowl on his face, that not even a face mask could hide, his voice filled with aggression toward his opponents, and the sounds of smaller explosions he released from the palms of his hands to try to intimidate others. That sight caught him by surprise as panic shot through Izuku's body and 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. What the f was Bakugo doing here? Had he been dragged into this against his will? Or was he here by choice? And most importantly, why wasn't he in the correctional center that he had been sentenced to attend after his trial? Mirko, monitoring from the van, immediately noticed the abrupt shake of the video feed. With a sharp curse, she forced the communication channel open again, overriding the previous radio silence. "Midoriya, what the hell is going on? Talk to me." Her voice crackled urgently into his earpiece, and that put Izuku's mind back into the situation. Someone that shouldn't be here at all is here. Katsuki Bakugo is in the pit. I don't know why," he whispered back, barely audible. The revelation shocked him to his core, because the last thing he knew about Bakugo's fate was that he blew up his chance to enter a juvenile training school in Mustafu after he refused to accept fault for what he did, which ended with his expulsion from UA. He blamed the whole world for his misfortunes, insisting that everyone else was at fault for treating him like he was the bad guy when he believed he was the hero. That childish mindset, combined with the fact that Bakugo was showing his character was already set in stone, led the judge overseeing his case to send him to a juvenile prison. The fact that he was there for some reason put Izuku on edge, as the fact that someone who should be in a juvenile prison was instead fighting like a rabid dog in that pit meant that something was really wrong here. "Midoriya, can you continue being down there? Or do you wish to pull out? The choice is yours," Roko said. She was not going to let Izuku force himself to be there if he was getting altered enough by seeing one person that he knew was there, but in the end, the choice was his. "I will pull back, but I will make sure that I get a good recording of Bakugo there, because UA must know that one of the students that they had expelled and had been sent to juvenile prison in Mustafu had somehow ended up in Osaka," Izuku said. He had kept his voice as low as possible, using certain words that could trigger suspicion if heard, but the people screaming like banshees helped him keep his conversation unheard by others. Izuku made sure to get his eyes and the camera in his mask on Bakugo to collect not only visual evidence but also audio from those moments. After 30 minutes, Izuku pulled out and returned to the elevator that would take him outside. He summoned his grimoire while alone in that elevator and switched masks again, making sure the one on his face was a normal one, not one with recording devices. Izuku wasn't sure what he would find there once the reality of what he had volunteered to do set in. But not even in his wildest dreams would he have thought that he would see Bakugo there. The world moved at its own pace, and while Izuku walked away from the underground masquerade with more questions than answers, a tragedy had struck in Hosu. Prominence burn. Endeavor shouted partially in anger and grief as he prepared his ultimate move to cause as much damage as possible to Stain as she was giving a speech about culling a hero student who was a fraud in the making. As Stain's blade found a new target, that target was Shoto Todoroki. Shoto, upset at the fact that he had been forced to take an internship with his father, as no one else sent offers to him for some reason, refused to follow his father's instructions and went his own way when the city was overwhelmed by Nomus for some reason, and he had the misfortune to find Stain as he was about to kill Tenya Ida. Shoto, fully thinking that his ice was enough, tried to create as much ice as possible in order to trap the hero killer with his ice, But Stain was more fit than the average villain or first-year hero student, and turned his attempts to freeze him into something that gave the hero killer an extra advantage, as all that ice gave Stain more places to put his feet on so he could parkour his way out of any attack. Or to use that extra mobility to deliver an almost fatal blow on Shoto that only failed to kill him because a hero got into the scene and barely managed to push Stain out of the way so his lethal blow wasn't that final. The original Ingenium, who was now back on the field thanks to Izuku's Viento Albo, was unable to stand on the sidelines and keep playing up his injuries to fool Stain into not coming back to finish the job after finding out that Tenya was in Hosu to hunt down Stain and was dodging any attempt of his sidekicks there to talk with him, and entered fully decked in his hero suit as he rushed to the scene and punched Stain out of the way. That action turned an almost clear-cut decapitation in one swing, to Stain delivering a slice to Shoto's throat that damaged his vocal cords and some of the vertebrae in his neck. Stain was pushed back to the streets with that punch from Ingenium, and he reacted poorly as he saw Endeavor and other heroes ready to pounce on him. Stain's action to taunt Endeavor pushed the man's anger to a breaking point, and he was ready to burn everything in Stain's direction after being told what had happened to Shoto, but before the flames could even consume Stain, All Might came out of nowhere and released a powerful punch to the air, which released a gust of wind that redirected the fire blast into the sky. Stain barely had any time to look at the man whom he idolized so much, as All Might delivered a quick blow to the villain's neck that incapacitated him. Stain, in a way, got what he wanted as he was stopped by All Might himself, but the way that the manhunt that was put together to hunt the hero killer had ended wasn't leaving a good aftertaste for the number 2 hero, who had seen how his masterpiece had been injured for life, and how All Might had stolen his chance to gain more glory with the capture of Stain. All Might wasn't going to let Endeavor kill a villain in a fit of despair and anger, as that could give the wrong message, but as the hero pondered the situation. A white-haired man was walking into a black portal made of mist. That man was Tamura Shigaraki, and he was somewhat content with the way that things had gone. Shigaraki knew that there was no way to try to convince Stain to join forces, as the hero killer was quite the All Might fan and Shigaraki wanted to kill him. So Shigaraki decided to try to marry Stain's reputation to his by lending some nomus that would help the hero killer conduct business while not being disturbed by the heroes. This plan was not perfect, as Stain's opening his mouth to reveal that he didn't know anything about why the nomus were there in public could ruin it, but Stain had been incapacitated before he could even talk about the nomus, and that meant that there was no one who could question their partnership now. Maybe there was someone worthwhile recruiting from all the Stain fanboys who were villains like him.